this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on Palmer, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Good morning. Alex Phillips here with you from 10 until 1 while Mrs. Hartley-Brewer goes and enjoys skiing, apparently. Good luck to her. Don't break a leg or anything, Jules. But I'll be keeping you company Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and, of course, my normal slot of Friday this week. And it's a real pleasure to be in the hot seat while things are very much hotting up. And we're going to be talking about that here with Talk on DAB+, on YouTube, on your smart speaker, on your connected devices, and, of course, on the snazzy little Talk app, which if you haven't downloaded, why not? Because it's a whole back catalogue of common sense on the go wherever you are. You can take us with you in your pocket. What more could you want in the world? Now, coming up on today's programme, Sir Keir Starmer has refused to urgently boost military spending amid a defence crisis in Europe. Government sources said he was still planning to spend 2.5% of GDP on the armed forces, despite calls to go beyond that. Now, that comes as the Prime Minister flies today to Paris for a crisis summit after the US warned Europe it must stop relying on Washington to boost its security. Also, more than 25,000 small boat migrants have reached Britain since Labour came into power. Yeah, they're really smashing the gangs, aren't they? A total of 240 migrants made the journey on Saturday, and that's according to the Home Office's own data. Deliveroo has sacked more than 100 riders as part of a crackdown on illegal immigrants in its workforce. Just 100, you say? I wonder if there was some sort of a legal work doge into all of these companies, how many people would end up no longer being able to scoot about bringing takeaways. Meanwhile, Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds has hit back at US Vice President J.D. Vance, saying he was wrong to say that the threat from within to free speech poses a greater danger to Europe than Russia. But is he? We've got some really good clips to play this morning that will tickle your fancy, no doubt. This is Talk. Welcome to the home of common sense. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in the studio by an always bubbly, excitable, enthusiastic, happy, joy-spreading, erudite character, Sam Armstrong. Hi, Sam.
Good morning.
Yeah, he's actually really forcing a smile because he came in looking really, really grim. And I was like, Sam, what is it? And he's like, oh, I've had to come back to London. And the first thing I saw when I got back home was just gangs of migrants on my street.
It was true. That's the consequences of 1 in 12 people in our capital city being an illegal migrant.
Right, and 60% of Londoners now aren't even born in the UK. It's not Britain. I've said this for a long time. Every time I say London isn't Britain, oh, this is terrible. Well, hold on. You can't have London as a city for everybody, all are welcome, and then say this represents the wider country. That's just, that's baloney. Now, let's talk about whether this is baloney or not. I think there's a lot to unpack, but also a lot of hyperbole and headlines to cut through with this, which is Sir Keir Starmer saying he's ready and willing to put British troops in Ukraine. Now, this was in an article he wrote for The Telegraph, which I've read, an exclusive article. And the headlines, of course, are sort of all that's it, British soldiers are going off to Ukraine right now to face down Russian troops after it's all been carved up because that's what Trump and Putin are going to do. That is what you would have told to you by many people in the legacy media. But how true is that as a representation of reality?
Well, the first thing is we don't know. Sergei Lavrov is on his way to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia as we speak to negotiate some of these basic details. But here's the essential conundrum, which is Russia has made it very clear that it does not wish Ukraine to join NATO. That is one of its big red lines. Ukraine, on the other hand, is desperate to join NATO for the simple reason that if you invade a NATO country, every country is legally obliged to help. So it acts as a permanent barrier against Russia invading it. And of course, Ukraine wants a guarantee that if it's prepared to do a deal in which it gives up not only a claim over Crimea, which it lost in 2014, but the eastern provinces of in the Donbass, that it is never, ever going to lose another piece of territory again. And remember, the West promised Ukraine back in the 1990s that if it gave up its nuclear weapons, that it would guarantee its security. It hasn't lived up to that. So this time, you're left with, well, if it doesn't join NATO, what can you do? And I do think it's a very, very serious possibility that the way we get around that is by deploying European forces to patrol a newly set out demilitarised zone at the border, the newly drawn border between the territory that Russia has seized and the rest of Ukraine.
Well, let me play devil's advocate somewhat here. So first of all, has he jumped the gun a bit, Sir Keir Starmer, in turning around and sort of, OK, so when you read the conditionality and the nuance with which this article has been written compared to the headlines, he hasn't said absolutely we're sending troops. He said in the, scenario that we would have to, we'd be prepared to. But at the same time, he said he cannot retract that. And he said that before we know what the situation is going to be, before there is any deal on the table. I totally agree with you. For there to even be an outcome to that deal, Ukraine being in NATO would be a Russian red line. So it's for the birds. And I don't think that Ukraine can even join NATO while essentially it is a country at war. But he hasn't sat down with his European counterparts yet. Now, we know he's going to Paris and is doing that today as we speak, in fact. And then later he is going to Washington, D.C. to speak with his American counterparts. He wants to be the Churchill in this situation. He wants to be the interlocutor between America and Europe at a time, frankly, when it's not really looking like they're getting on very well. Certainly America is pointing the finger at Europe and saying, get your act together. But we don't really know what the outcome of any of those conversations are going to be. And here we are going, yay, UK to the rescue, at a time when our troop numbers have diminished to 70,000, down from about 120,000 as they were during the Falklands crisis. At a time when, we don't even have a pathway yet to reaching the 2.5% of GDP spending on defence. Is it all talk and all rhetoric to make himself look big when there's not really any substance to back this up? Is that foolhardy?
Well, I think there is a real question as to whether we could sustain this kind of intervention. The British Army could now fit comfortably into Old Trafford Stadium without having anybody stood outside. So you've now got a really, really, really diminished army. You're asking it to deploy potentially for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, we saw in Germany, of course, the peacekeeping mission there lasted for the best part of half a century. So there is this huge question with this greatly diminished army. Are we writing checks that we can't possibly cash? Now, on the other hand, Europe has been very, very clear that it wants to step up in this way. I think that was the message that came out of the Munich Security Conference at last week, which is that it is not prepared in some ways to rely on America, because America, it says, can't be relied on. Now, if it had paid its bills on NATO and put in its defence spending in the first place, it wouldn't have been left in that situation.
Well, I mean, one thing I'd also like to point out, if you want to contextualise how diminished our troops are, there are more young men of fighting age coming over on an annual basis in small boats than we have, entire staff numbers in the combined armed forces. I mean, that sends a shiver down my spine. But the other thing that sends a shiver down my spine is this. The way Russia retaliates to threats or perceived threats, the way that Russia tries to fend off this sort of affirmative action by another nation isn't necessarily with direct conflict. I mean, for all of the sort of grandstanding about we've got nuclear weapons, we've got Satan, whatever it's called, we're going to point it at you, we're going to flood the UK. What we've seen actually with the war of attrition in Ukraine is how capable are the Russian armed forces anyway at this point? We know that they're going to have taken a hit, but they haven't been able actually to beat Ukraine when they're supposed to be one of the greatest armies on earth. But what they do brilliantly well and regularly is use what is called grey zone warfare. And they use agents, the FSB, in other countries and Wagner mercenaries to destabilise regimes. They're very good at cutting power cables under oceans, committing cyber attacks against countries. We've had arson attacks here in the United Kingdom against weapons manufacturers as we were arming Ukraine. And I wonder, when we appear right now to be standing alone, saying we're going to commit the paltry number of troops that we've got anyway over to Ukraine, if Russia's going to sort of start turning up the energy on some of those domestic attacks here, the sort of more subterranean, out-of-sight attacks being perpetrated by some of their agents.
Yeah, and there is no doubt that we are extremely vulnerable to that kind of attack. For example, Russia's newfound habit of cutting undersea cables. Well, the UK's cable system is perilously undefended. We have massive data links that basically mean that we can turn on the internet between us and the United States, for example, none of which are properly guarded, none of which are defended. And of course, in the case that we see all too often, which is a Russian boat drops off a little submarine, goes down, cuts the cable undersea, you would never know it happened until all of a sudden great parts of the grid or our ability to connect around the world was shut down almost overnight. So yes, we absolutely have to be prepared for that to get turned up. Now, I guess there is an argument that goes both ways. The way you repel or the way you put off the likes of Vladimir Putin from conducting those kind of operations is by strength and by standing up to him. And one of the lessons of the Ukraine war is if you stand up to the likes of Putin, you can beat him. I mean, it used to be said that Russia had the second strongest army in the world. It now has only the second strongest army in Ukraine. Right. And that kind of strength, that kind of hard power sometimes, or being prepared to respond like for like, is actually what puts off dictators, not pussyfooting around and being very delicate about it.
So it seems to me, actually, what you're saying is J.D. Vance very much had a point at the Munich Security Conference on Friday when he stood up and actually said, it is your weakness in Europe that I'm more worried about, and picking up on that. They're all hand-wringing, saying, isn't he terrible? How dare you do this? We know that Russia has used the migrant crisis as grey zone warfare, that they're very much behind the trafficking of a lot of these people into Europe to destabilise it. And yet we're still woefully weak week on border control. We have every right to defend people invading our country, and no European nation is doing that. We know as well that since 2014 in Crimea, where we essentially just went, oh, OK, when Putin decided he wanted to land grab that huge bit of critical territory, that instead of there being a toughened stance against Putin, it became more and more normalised. The UK was the sort of headquarters of Russian money laundering. Germany's in negotiations about Nord Stream 2. So when Putin does march into Ukraine, there's dithering. Germany doesn't want weapons being sent to Ukraine. They don't want sanctions being put against Russia. They still want Nord Stream 2 to go ahead. And so Putin, I mean, when they turn around and say, well, this is terrible, this is appeasement, Trump is making Putin look like he's bigger on the world stage than he is. My argument is, no, you did that perennially. You did that in the whole run-up to this crisis.
Yeah, the invasion of Ukraine was funded largely by Germany's energy policy decisions, which it made in the last decade, turning off all of its nuclear power stations, relying on the importation of gas, and billions upon billions upon billions of dollars was paid by Germans to Russia when we knew the overwhelming chunk of that cash was going to be piled straight into the coffers of the Kremlin and go towards funding this war. And you're right also to link it to the migration crisis, which is we have a national security emergency going on each and every day in our country. I mean, forget about Russians slipping into Ukraine. We have thousands of men on certain days breaking into our country. We've got no idea who these are. Many of whom have gone straight onto terror watch lists, smuggling themselves in with organised criminals, some linked to foreign intelligence services and all the like, into our country, turning up. And what do? Instead of securing our own borders, we pay to place them in hotels.
Right, we roll out the red carpet. It is the most mad thing I've ever seen, and I think JD Vance was absolutely right. Let's have a little watch of this clip.
After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
Oh, look at him crying. Well, that's the chairman of the Munich Security Council the other day, Christoph Heusgen. He was Undersecretary for Foreign and Security Policy in the German Chancellery from 2005 to 2017, described as Angela Merkel's most influential foreign policy and security advisor. Of course, Ursula von der Leyen was defence minister at the time in Germany, known to be the people who decimated German troops and Arsenal. Why do you think he's crying? Why is he, oh no, it's so sad, JD Vance is being cruel? I think he's crying because he's been found out. This was under his watch. It's people like him who have frog-marched the whole of Europe into this mess.
Yeah, let's be incredibly clear. There was a cabal at the top of Europe's leadership for 2 decades, 3 decades, and in great parts of America too, that were quite happy to let our security be undermined gradually and steadily. We're quite happy to let our country be changed beyond all recognition through weakness, through so-called liberalism, through so-called progressivism, all while they got rich, globe-trotting around. We saw our country change forever, and all the while any kind of questioning, any kind of scrutiny, any kind of calling out was brushed under the carpet, was at times decried as misinformation, hate speech, whatever. And you've now got to the stage where American leadership has come onto the global scene and it said, do you know what, this happened, that happened, and this is still happening to this day. Yeah. And their response was to go tonto, to go completely and utterly crazy, to start crying, to denying basic facts. It is ridiculous, and it just proves that the set of people that go to these Davos conferences, that go to the likes of Munich Security Conferences, all of these kind of cosy clubs on the world scene have time and time again put their own interests, their own popularity on this circuit above the interests of their country, and when it's pointed out to them, they just don't like it.
There you go. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, can you say it any better? Do you want to give me your thoughts on all of this and more? The number to call 0344 499 1000, charged at your standard network rate. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message, 0344 499 1000, or indeed leave me a little voice note. 8722 is the number to text. You have to write talk before your message. That way it pings the masts on top of talk towers and it gets into the studio in this Cape Canaveral setup I have in front of me. We're on Elon Musk's X at talkTV, and we're going to be right back to hear from you after this.
We need to recognize that this is a very serious moment for the security of Europe. The United States is looking like it's stepping back from NATO in its commitment to help support peace in Europe, and that is very serious indeed. I think it represents extraordinary naivety on the part of President Trump, and the rest of his team. And I'd like to remind your readers that I think it's your viewers that I think it is.
When Britain was in the EU, they had the role of being the bridge between America and Europe, but because they were in both camps. But because of Brexit, we lost that role. There is no bridge. Trump is already actively excluding Britain from negotiations. He's even excluding Zelensky. Right. So they're having a meeting over there. They don't.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, my angels, my patriots, my gorgeous human beings. Thank you for joining me today on this rather bright and cheerful looking London day. I don't know what it's like where you are. Apparently, if you're up in Scotland, it could be hullabaloo. It could be sort of icy rain and snow and dangerous roads. So be careful if that's you. But I hope it's bright and cheerful where you are, and that, like me, you can try and smile through the chaos with our communal catharsis. And to kick off the sort of kumbaya round table moment where we all put an arm of comfort around each other and say, we're not mad. They are. Let's speak to Dave, who's in London. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, Starmer going on about troops on the ground. He's writing checks he can't cash. This country doesn't have the stomach for it. You mentioned before there are more people coming off the boats than we've got armed forces. Well, here's another statistic for you. 50% of our youngsters now go to university.
Right.
And every university does not allow the armed forces in their Freshers' Week anymore because they're nasty armed forces.
Right.
So how do we have a situation where, well, who's going to be going to do this fighting? I think I can guess. White working-class boys from Essex and Darlington and everywhere else, and there will be Mr. Starmer on his tank in his camouflage jacket with his sons and his nieces and his relatives all safely tucked up at home. They won't be going. Yeah. They'll come and ask white working-class boys to go, and if I were them, I'd say, what am I fighting for again? I'm certainly not fighting for a country that's worth fighting for. So you go and do your EDI on this. You go and make sure you've got the right quotas going, because all of a sudden, a lot of those people will, I can't go because of religious grounds. I can't go because of beliefs and all this kind of stuff.
I mean, what's interesting, actually, also there was a very interesting survey done by the Times newspaper about a week ago, I think it was. It might have been more recent than that. But looking at attitudes among young people in this country, and the percentage of young people, I think it was over 50%, but I'd have to recheck that article, who said that they don't like this country and that they think it's racist. It is astonishing. They would have no interest defending this country. And all these people, Sam and I were talking earlier about 60% of people in London now weren't even born in this country. You think if anything were to kick off in the UK, mass civil unrest when there's another Southport or something like that, or if Russian FSB agents start attacking our infrastructure, and loads of disaffected youths are going out on the loot, what do you think's going to happen to the 60% of people who were born abroad in London? They'll just go home. They're not going to turn around and want to defend our big cities, are they? So I think you make a very, very valid point, Dave.
You saw that when the Ukraine war kicked off. If you remember, a lot of the people trying to get out of Ukraine were fighting-age men that weren't Ukrainian, that were at their universities. They were the first trying to get on the train.
Of course they would be. Yeah, exactly. No, this is it. And I think that, I don't think Western leaders have really woken up to this. But a very good point was made to me by my brilliant producer, Ted, who always, as soon as I come in the mornings, I say, what do you think about this, Ted? And he always has a perspective. And I think I'm going to nick that and say it on air and take credit for it. But not today. I'm giving the credit to Ted. But he said, look, actually, do you know what? We've had armed forces who have sat there and been told that they're sort of, got to do DEI and wear rainbow lanyards for too long now. They go out and we have troops stationed in Ukraine. They will be working alongside now some of the most experienced troops in the whole of Europe, people with real-world exercise. And you know as well that what a lot of this war has been used to do is try out new technologies, especially drone technologies. Ukraine has become so advanced in that particular field, which they have done themselves. They've been adapting drones and getting right into the heart of Russian territory, striking critical infrastructure, taking out would-be attackers. And, instead of moaning that our armed forces are kind of not fit for purpose and much diminished, maybe this could have the opposite effect. And I do think that is an opinion worth considering. But like you were saying, Dave, is he cashing checks that, well, he can't afford? Thank you ever so much, Dave in London. Now, let's do a little voice note before we go to another David. Let's first hear from Phil.
Good morning, Alex. Great show. Keir Starmer, he's prepared to put our troops in front of the Russians, but he wouldn't stand in front of our own farmers. He ran away from them. And that's the measure of the man we've got as Prime Minister.
I am glad you brought that up. Now, wakey, Sam, because I'm about to throw to you. I saw him texting out of the corner of my eye or doing research, I reckon. That's what he's doing. He's going down various wormholes, so he's getting some brilliant arguments ready. But I'm going to throw a curveball at you because Phil's talking about farmers there. Now, I have said for a long time that you've got to be self-sufficient as a nation. What Starmer is doing is driving farming out of the country. If it's not happening immediately when those farms are supposed to be inherited, they won't be. They won't be able to afford the tax. They're going to have to sell off land. There's this huge push to cover agricultural land in solar panels as well. And if you want to know what your enemy's plans are for you, look at what your enemies are doing. And I take China as the main case in point here. China has decided that due to the instability of the world, it wants to be self-sufficient agriculturally. It wants to make sure it can feed its people in the event of a global crisis. We saw what happened already at the outbreak of the invasion of Ukraine, where Russia was wargaming. Fertilizer coming out of Odessa, wheat, oil. Ukraine is so important, actually, for feeding the world. It created global inflation. Part of the territory that Putin so desperately wants is that control of the Black Sea. And so we're potentially sleepwalking into a situation like at the start of the Second World War, where we produced only 60% of our food, the same now. That's about to go down. Outbreak of war, and look what happens. Dig for victory, ration books. I mean, it's just madness. This is playing into what we've been saying about Russia in particular and China, the anti-Western axis, that they don't use tanks and bombs and guns and conventional warfare to try and undermine the West. This suits them perfectly.
Yeah, food security is national security. You can't fight a war unless you can feed your people first. But Keir Starmer has got such a class warfare mentality, such a natural disdain for rural people, for the farming community, that he knows that this is bad. He knows that this is going to cause devastating consequences. They've admitted as much. But he is so hell-bent, he's so determined now that he has to push this through, that consequences be damned, he is going to make it impossible to live and run a farming business in this country. Even last weekend we saw going to change the rules on so that farmers have to store their shotguns. I mean, every farmer in this country has a shotgun. They're now going to have to go and store their shotgun potentially 20-30 miles away in a central holding room. This is a government that doesn't understand rural people,
right,
and insofar as it does understand them, it just doesn't like them very much.
Couldn't agree more. Let's quickly talk now to David, who's in the best county on earth. It's Gloucestershire. Hi, David.
Good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
I'm afraid you've just made my main point about the fact that Starmer wouldn't stand up to even the farmers last week and ran away. But I will go on to change the subject slightly. But the fact that he actually changed the rules the other day, is it correct that he's now going to tax the death in service payments to the soldiers or to the military people?
Right, do you know what? I don't. You're ahead of me there, David. You are feeding me information that I don't know myself, so I can't turn around and go, yes, I don't know.
Apparently, yes. Apparently, if you're not married or you haven't been together very long with your relationship, they're going to cut it, or they're going to tax the death in service payments, 20% tax.
Right.
So he's going to send troops possibly to their deaths, and then he's going to say, "Oh, I'm not going to pay you the full payment."
The family left behind, they're not going to. They're going to have really diminished financial support.
The bloke's a rat, and that's all you can describe him as. I absolutely despise the man.
I disagree with one thing. You say he's a rat, and that's all you can describe him as. I've got more choice words than that, David. We're going to have to go to a break now, but that's a really good point. I'm going to look into that right now during the advert break. Death in service payments. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. You've been a great lot today. We've got so many messages coming in as well. I'm going to try and read those later on in the show. We're going to be sticking with this conversation. Are we right to say we're ready and willing to send British troops into Ukraine? We're going to be catching up with former Conservative Armed Forces Minister after this.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Well, it's been a discussion that's been taking place all weekend in the media, various headlines. But I think the biggest headline out today is that the stunning revelation that Sir Keir Starmer, written exclusively in The Telegraph, said that he is ready and willing to put British troops in Ukraine. Now, this comes ahead of going over to Washington, D.C. to speak to his American counterparts. America today in Riyadh in Saudi to discuss what some sort of deal between Russia and Ukraine might look like with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister there. At the same time, there is this so-called crisis meeting taking place in Paris with European leaders all getting together in a panic going, we've lost control of the situation. What should we do? Well, in the middle of all of that static and all of that noise where nothing is clear, nothing's been decided, everyone's talking in different silos, Starmer's turned around and said, don't worry, the Brits are here. We can send Russian troops to Ukraine. I would say it was slightly more nuanced than that, but let's just go with what the hyperbolic headlines are saying. Is this a good idea? Is this right? Is this affirmative and decisive? And finally, Britain acting authoritatively. Is this a Starmer PR campaign? Wanting to look Churchillian and actually not really thinking things through and committing to what is right now an unknown situation with diminished troop sizes? Or is this potentially great? Might brings peace. Is this Britain basically saying we're going to go to Ukraine? This isn't about going to war, but if there is a peace negotiation, we're going to play our part. And actually, that will be a tremendous fillip to the armed forces, actually getting some real-world experience, learning about the new battlefield technologies. Lots of questions there to be answered. Who better actually to address those than James Heapy, because he indeed was former Conservative Armed Forces Minister. James, great to have you on the programme. What do you make? Alex. What do you make of Starmer's article in The Telegraph today?
I think it's good. I think it's necessary. I think that the UK is going to need to lead, and there will be plenty of very, very sane people listening to your show who served in the armed forces who will say, well, with what? Our armed forces aren't big enough, they're not resourced enough, they've been hollowed out, all of which is true. But the two aren't mutually exclusive. So I think if you look at the situation of politics in Europe right now, Macron is the senior statesman. He's been his longest, but his domestic politics mean that he's much more limited in what he can now do. I think Merz, the guy who looks like he's about to win the German elections, is a big upgrade on Olaf Scholz in terms of his willingness to lead within Europe and be a bit more assertive over the German position on Ukraine. But that will depend on who his coalition partners are, the degree to which he has that freedom. And so really, just in terms of the political freedoms, Keir Starmer is in the best position of European leaders to kind of take the lead and offer that commitment. Thereafter, he obviously needs to resource it, and that is going to need more money on defence, because we're going to need a bigger set of armed forces in order to be able to deliver the sort of commitment that he needs to make to Ukraine, as well as honouring all of our commitments to NATO and around the world.
What about the potential risk of Russian retaliation as to Starmer sort of striding out solo right now on this and saying that we're prepared to send British troops to Ukraine? Yes, in theory, a peacekeeping force, but it does put us in a position where if we played this forward, they're essentially there to fight mano a mano with Russians if need be. That might be considered an escalation by Russia. It would certainly potentially put us in the crosshairs of Russian wrath. Is there a risk here that Russia might try and use, say, acts of grey zone warfare in this country to deter us from being so strident?
Well, yes, but of course they already are. I mean, they poisoned some people in Salisbury a few years ago. They routinely interfere with disinformation to subvert our public discourse. There are plenty of allegations around cyber attacks and whatever else. So, Russia already regards the UK as a thought leader in Europe and a sort of a leading rallier, if you like, of European opposition to Russia, and that's made us a target for a while. I guess there are two ways of looking at it. You could just turn around and say, do you know what, not our problem. We are an island on the northwestern side of the European continent, long, long way from trouble. Let others deal with it. But that is not what the United Kingdom is. It is not what this country has been throughout our history, and nor should it be what it is now. Because there is just this reality that if more and more of Europe, and we've got some wonderful, wonderful friends, allies and trading partners in Eastern and Central Europe who do look to us as a leader and a friend and a powerful ally. And if we're just going to turn our back on them and say, you know, we'd rather have perfect roads, perfect NHS, perfect schools, and to be honest with you, you just deal with your own security, not unlike what the US has just done, I think we'd be making a massive mistake and ignoring our geography. The United States is an ocean away. We're about 20 miles away.
Well, indeed, we already have Russian bears buzzing the eastern coastline of the United Kingdom and Russian subs stalking through the channel on a regular basis. But what do you make of, look, I mean, I keep trying to reinforce, everyone's sort of losing their head over whatever's being discussed right now in Saudi, in Riyadh. And there are people saying, well, that's it, you know, Putin's got this, Putin's got that. America said they're going to give Putin whatever territory he's got so far. America said that Ukraine's not allowed to join NATO. Again, I kind of think that that's just being realistic. I don't think Putin will agree to any part of a settlement involving Ukraine being in NATO. But what do you make of those conversations? How do you think that things are going to play out? Do you think it's going to amount to appeasement in Trump's, let's say, desperation to create peace? Or is America strategically aware that actually, if Russia gets access to a lot of Black Sea territory, they can then use that to continue to create perma-crises that have ripple effects across the globe?
So, I mean, who knows? You know, we don't know what the negotiations or the start of negotiations in Riyadh are going to look like. I think that Pete Hesketh, in his quite remarkable contributions in Brussels last Wednesday and Thursday, where he basically ceded the territory, ceded NATO membership, and said to the Russians that the United States would be disinvesting from the continent, didn't exactly tee up the negotiating team flying from the US to Saudi with a sort of strong hand. But, you know, the United States is a powerful player and it's got lots of leverage. But the fact that these negotiations appear to be happening without the Ukrainians, and if it is indeed the US's position that the peace that they broker should be guaranteed by Europeans, the fact that the negotiations aren't happening with those Europeans as well, does make these negotiations somewhat incredible. And the real danger is that out of US political expediency, and there's a sort of domestic imperative, I think, to sort of end the war, America first, and sort of stick it to the Europeans who are regarded as kind of overly woke and having lost their way in terms of liberal democratic values. So there's a sort of thing that's going on there domestically, but also the US wants to free up military resource for its competition with China. If those are the two guiding stars, rather than what is sensible, sustainable, and realistic for the long-term security of the European continent, then it makes me very nervous. And I don't mind the US taking the position that it is taking, but it should accept that if the long-term guarantee of whatever peace is negotiated is a commitment by Europeans, then at the very least, someone from, you know, Ursula von der Leyen, Keir Starmer, Macron, you know, Scholz, Maloney should be in the room when that is being discussed, because it's a commitment on us to guarantee it. And Zelensky, I mean, all the way through this, all those American tax dollars that have been spent, UK pounds, euros from the European Union, they've been spent to restore Ukrainian sovereignty. Now, if, Alex, you think that the territory was never recoverable, and there are plenty of people that think that, the sovereignty that we were arguably fighting for was for this to at least end on Zelensky's terms,
Right.
And we're now taking that away too.
You misinterpret what I said. What I'm actually saying is I think it would be an absolute disaster if Russia got especially Black Sea territory, because they've already used that to try and weaponize global food supply chains and create inflation. They want that territory strategically for a reason, and I think it's terrifying that Russia could dominate the Black Sea while Iran dominates the Red Sea, while China tries to dominate all maritime routes around the world with its Belt and Road Initiative. So you misinterpret what I'm saying there.
I mean, it was a rhetorical flourish rather than any. It was really inserting your name for the sake of engagement rather than reflecting what you had said.
Now, is what Sir Keir Starmer has said in terms of committing British troops also a rhetorical flourish if he's not able to create a financial pathway to giving 2.5% of GDP to the armed forces? Should we actually be looking at giving more? And he should be desperately trying right now to figure out where that cash is going to come from.
Yeah, key point. And that is, I think what people might misunderstand in the Treasury and number 10, where these things are being discussed, is, okay, well, look, we've got an armed forces that is this size. What we'll do is we'll say we'll put 10,000 people into Ukraine, and we'll just shuffle the deck and do less elsewhere in order to prioritize Ukraine. But the problem is that right now the entire Russian army is concentrated in Ukraine. All of the sort of bits of the Russian command structure, so the Western Military District and Northern Military District that are next to Belarus, Poland, and then Finland, they're empty. Everybody's down in Ukraine. At the end of the war, those Russians go back to their garrisons and they sit at readiness, threatening the whole of the NATO frontage.
But I mean, I mean, you're right. The Russian troops may go back to the garrisons, but how many of these people are trained Russian soldiers at this point? If anything, perhaps what the invasion of Ukraine has exposed is the Russian army isn't as big and as scary and as capable as we thought. It has been dragged out into a war of attrition. They've lost countless numbers of troops. They're having to bring in people from North Korea. They haven't got the job done, and it's been years. And that's despite the prevarication of Europe, who aren't even now sending the weapons that Ukraine needs.
Maybe, but that's not quite the point. So when the Russian armed forces redisperse back to their garrisons and they sit at readiness across the whole of the NATO frontage, they hold the whole of the NATO frontage at risk, which means that all of the commitments that we have made to NATO, the UK is very committed to Estonia, for example, we have to continue to honour those commitments. NATO might even ask us to do more in Estonia once the Western Military District is repopulated with the Russian troops that haven't been there for the last few years. So therefore, we need the Army, the Navy and the Air Force that we've got right now, perhaps even arguably bigger, simply to meet those NATO commitments. Everything that we do in Ukraine is on top of that, which is why we're going to need a bigger army, a bigger Navy and a bigger Air Force. You can't just reprioritise the current force to do Ukraine instead of the things we're already committed to do for NATO.
James, thank you ever so much. It's been fascinating talking to you. A brilliant discussion there. That's James Heappey, who, of course, in the previous government with the Conservatives was the Armed Forces Minister. Going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, NHS appointments. Guess what? Press release from number 10. We've hit that target. We've got 2 million appointments already, more than we had under the previous administration. Let's get out the champagne. Aren't we delivering? Everything's going well. Is this just a load of vacuous propaganda? I wonder. We'll be digging into that after this.
to be really cautious before making declarations like that. We are still in a hot war. We've just seen Russia take about 600 square miles over winter from Ukraine. So under what circumstances is he saying this should happen? He's saying peacekeepers. That suggests once a peace deal's in place. But we're not looking for any peace deal here. We're looking for a deal that ensures that we don't see more war in Europe, not just a cessation of immediate fighting. So I think it's quite risky to suddenly announce that you're going to put British troops on the ground without having set out the parameters of what that looks like.
When Britain was in the EU, they had the role of being the bridge between America and Europe, but because they were in both camps. But because of Brexit, we lost that role. There is no bridge. Trump is already actively excluding Britain from negotiations. He's even excluding Zelensky.
Right.
So they're having a meeting over there. They don't really know what they're talking about because they're not privy to any negotiation minutes. So what are they going to be discussing?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they said they were going to sort out the NHS, get rid of the abysmal long waiting list that we suffered under the Conservative government. They did, of course, give huge pay rises to doctors and nurses after endless strikes. And apparently, it's all been for the betterment of this country because over 2 million extra NHS appointments, including for chemotherapy, radiotherapy, endoscopy and diagnostic tests, have been delivered as government has taken its first step to fix the NHS 7 months early. They've got there ahead of time. Well, that's according to the press release coming from Number 10. But like most things that come out of Number 10, regardless of who's in charge, you sometimes have to dig into the data and take it with a pinch of salt. And actually, when you look at this, the new data that confirms the government reached the target 7 months earlier than promised is actually comparing to a period of time when all the doctors were on strike anyway. Oh, what do you make of that? Well, let's find out what Professor Carol Sikora makes of it, Medical Director of the Rutherford Cancer Centres, someone who works in the private sector who've had to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to picking up the NHS slack. Great to have you on the show, Carol. What do you make of this announcement? Should we welcome it? Are we beginning to see light at the end of the tunnel, or is this, well, a little bit dubious?
It's pretty impossible to judge. You can't verify it. It's typical political posturing on a time when there's not that much dramatic news out there. It's all discussion about peace in various parts of the world. And it's a great story to put out. But when you look at it, you can easily fiddle the statistics. For example, if I was in a hospital or a chief executive, I had to make a return on number of appointments. Why don't I just count the blood tests as an appointment? And that would double the number of appointments seen in the last week. I mean, it would just, most patients get a blood test at some point. If you count that as an appointment, then obviously you do well. It just lacks any credibility. The report coming from Number 10, it says cancer treatment, fantastic, and Starmers quoted as saying that. But you know, the 62-day wait is not being met in about 30% of all the trusts around the country. So I'd take it with a pinch of salt, Alex, at this stage. Let's see some data.
What we do know is, of course, when it came to elective surgeries, elective tests, all the rest of it, that they were the things particularly impacted by the doctors' strikes, and there's a huge amount of catching up to do, and they've had to rely heavily on outsourcing that to the private sector to get that done. Equally, I would imagine that a lot of people have chosen to go privately anyway because they've not been able to access those appointments. We are hearing Wes Streeting talking about actually creating more competition by getting private companies into the NHS and using the private sector a lot more. We also know that some of the sort of meagre growth we've got in the UK economy, a lot of that is actually down to medical insurance. That's an industry that's booming. But is this really the solution? I mean, should they just sort of be looking at the model of the NHS as a whole, say that's not working? Is it about just saying to the private sector, look, we're going to desperately need you guys, and are they doing that?
No. What we need to do is get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare that's the NHS. It really is a bureaucracy. If you review a patient's notes now, and I've been in the business 50 years as a doctor, so I can remember the past. Someone was in charge. The doctors were in charge of the patients, and they'd make sure they got a good journey through the bureaucracy of the system. Okay. You know, when I was first a consultant, the costs were much lower than they are now of treating people, and most people were a lot younger. You know, the average age of a cancer patient when I started in cancer medicine, which is my specialty, was about 55 to 60. Now it's 70 to 75. So things have moved on. And of course, the older you get, the more disease you accumulate through your life, whether we like it or not. So it's more complex treating. But going back to the problem, the whole machine of the NHS is fundamentally a bureaucratic quagmire and of multi-professionals that are not working as a team properly. They're doctors, the nurses, the physiotherapists, the radiographers, and so on. We've got to get back the idea that we're doing something. If you want to get your car fixed, you don't want to get involved in disputes as to who's going to take the spark plugs out. You just want the job done. It's the same with medicine. And I think doctors have really lost the plot. The current generation of young doctors are now clones of each other. And whilst they're technically competent, they don't really take responsibility for running the service. And that's what we've got to get back to.
Do you know, it's funny you say that. I often think these days when you look at a lot of young GPs that they're just good at Googling stuff. I wonder how much involvement they've got with practicing actual medicine. Could the solution be creating a lot more polyclinics? I ask that because my experience living on the European continent, where that is the model, under health insurance model as well, we're talking about Brussels here, is that when you go and see the equivalent to the GP in the same practice, you have the physiotherapist, you've got phlebotomy, you've got all these other sort of, you know, built-in services where one assumes that they coordinate and they discuss with each other at the end of the day.
I think that's right. And someone has to be in charge. It doesn't have to be the doctor. It could be one of the other health professionals, but someone has to be in charge. And that means not getting paid more necessarily. It means taking responsibility for the service. And that's the problem. No one's taking responsibility for the service. And most people are demotivated. They come into it with great excitement. To get into medical school these days, you have to have the top grades and ridiculously high. You don't need to have 4A levels at star level, for example. You could take people with lower, if provided they're hardworking, dedicated, and willing to do it. And leadership is sadly lacking in healthcare here. If you go into Europe, as you say, the system's different. There's still a health service. People don't die on the streets because they can't afford to go into a hospital. There are systems to protect people. That's what we call, availability of care for everybody. And so we don't have to have an NHS. We can do it in different ways. We have to have a social insurer, and that's how France and Germany work. And it works much better. In cancer, for example, if you have symptoms that make you think you have cancer and it turns out to be the case, you'll be treated next week. Whereas here... And
that's the most important thing. I mean, Sam, that is, at the end of the day, when people handling about save our NHS, it's not our NHS when you can't get an appointment. It's not our NHS when you're failing to get the diagnostics that then sentences you to death.
Yeah, and politicians are remarkably squeamish about touching these things, despite the fact when you sit down with them, when you have a conversation with them privately, they all know the NHS's problems. They know that every time they try and do anything, every time they chuck a load more money at it, all that happens is the bureaucracy grows, the not quite doctors grow, the people that aren't either nurses or doctors but are working in there. All of the problems that come about with this state system, every politician knows it, and yet none of them will do what they know is necessary.
That's the problem with having a state-run anything. Thank you to Professor Carol Sikora. We're going to take a short break now. Don't go anywhere. Back after this.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Alex Phillips here until 1 o'clock. I'm going to be here doing the 10 to 1 every day this week, not just my usual Friday slot, as Ms. Hartley-Brewer is off. What do they say? So there's a cool way of saying skiing, isn't there? Like powder something. I don't know. Eat powder. You're just looking at me like I'm talking nonsense, which is kind of what I do for a living. But she is off somewhere chilly, probably enjoying the après-ski. So, yeah, enjoy, Julia. Don't break a leg. But I'm here to keep you company. Regardless, 10 till 1 every day this week. Let's read some of your messages. I've been a bit remiss in doing that so far in the programme. Leslie got in touch and says, how has the NHS increased its operations with the same amount of beds? Well, this is it. They've compared it to a week where the doctors were on strikes. They compared it to a much diminished week when the facilities were there, the scanners were there, but those appointments weren't taking place because the doctors weren't there. So like I said, always take statements from number 10 with a pinch of salt. Mike says, I think Starmer sees a war with Russia as a good way of distracting from his inept, useless leadership. Some of the weakest politicians love to use conflict as a way of bolstering their position. It's a great way of hiding the mess that he has made domestically. And let's face it, it's a good way to make money, is war. I'm talking about that sort of military-industrial complex there, although we can't see, it doesn't seem to be able to afford our armed forces much. Dr. Bob here. Hello, Dr. Bob. I served throughout the 1980s in the Royal Air Force and was proud to do so. These days it's treated with contempt, as are all the servicemen that we have serving today. And that's why people don't want to join up, because they keep saying the government is shafting them. Here's someone else, John, saying Starmer thinks he's Churchill. He, in fact, is Neville Chamberlain. And hi, Alex, on Ukraine, says Alan in Nottinghamshire. My understanding is that Article 5 of the NATO treaty does not mean that member countries have to directly intervene militarily if there is an attack on a fellow member. Yeah, I mean, there's sort of caveats to the lot of it. Peace is better, somebody says. Cripple Russia will release something darker like pre-World War II. All these fake wars have been the same. Nothing wrong with boosting our defence. If Russia can't beat Ukraine, it won't take on the EU or NATO. But we do need to show that we are on strong footing, and Germany is still importing gas. The problem is, of course, we're all in many respects still importing gas, because when we're buying relabelled gas from other countries, Sam's nodding away, what people don't realise is they're buying it from Russia and just doing all the refining.
Yeah, and taking massive and massive and massive amounts of profit on our naivety. And who are the chief offenders there? Our European allies that are so offended that JD Vance has come in and told them some hard truths.
Yeah. That, you know, basically they have totally messed up for decades now. By the way, there's been some breaking news from Kiev, where apparently Zelensky says he is also going to be off to Saudi Arabia later on in the week to join those talks. We don't know whether that will be with Russia or directly with America, but these so-called peace talks being brokered by Saudi in Riyadh, and Kiev saying Zelensky is going to be going to the country on Wednesday. So let's see how it all plays out. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has expressed doubts over whether European leaders can play a role in Ukraine's peace talks. Lavrov told reporters that Europe had already had several chances to be involved in discussions to end the conflict, and said he did not know what its nations would bring to the negotiating table. If Europe wants to continue the war in Ukraine, then why would they be invited to the talks, he said. Now, in many respects, I think this is playing into the American concept, or some Republican rhetoric, really, that this is all about continuing a war and that's unnecessary and we can just have peace and that's all very well. And Lavrov really sort of, I think, taking an opportunity here to kick Europe while it's been kicked already after JD Vance, and said, look, we're not interested in dealing with you. You've exacerbated this. You've prolonged this. It plays, like I said, into the American mindset. It's deliberately being used to divide, essentially, transatlantic relations. You can't blame Russia for doing that. That is to be expected. But, you know, European leaders have been super weak. Shall we look at that clip from the Munich Security Conference? Because I just love it. I could do with it in the top of the hour. Come on, let's roll it. Oh, poor tech op is desperately trying to find it.
After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
Well, there you go. Applauding a grown man crying. That pretty much sums up the state of Europe right now. And actually, if you look at that clip in the longer format, what's so hilarious is he can't finish his sentence. He has to walk off stage, and they all have to surround him and give him a big team hug because he's crying because of European values. And we know why he's crying. Let's just unpack who this guy is and why he might be snivelling on stage. He is essentially the guy who is directing the security conference over there in Munich. His name is Christoph Heusgen. I don't know how you say it. Sorry, Christoph. Oh, I better pronounce that right, so it might make you cry. Anyway, Christoph What's-Your-Face was Undersecretary for Foreign and Security Policy in the German Chancellery from 2005 to 2017. He's described as Angela Merkel's most influential foreign policy and security advisor. Yeah, you've got every reason to cry sunshine, because if you were advising Angela Merkel to get rid of nuclear, if you were advising her that you can carry on buying gas from Russia and dealing with Putin as if he's, you know, your best mate, if you're going to be advising Angela Merkel that when there's, you know, Islamist wars going on in the Middle East, the good thing to do is let all the people from those countries come to Europe, if you're going to be advising as well Ursula von der Leyen, who was defence minister for the main part of the time that he was in that role, that actually cutting German troops and cutting the German arsenal was fine because we now live in a peaceful world and money can be sent off elsewhere, I don't know, probably to look after all those migrants coming in from the Middle East. If that was your advice, then yeah, Carry on crying. Cry until you're 6 foot under, my friend, because you have caused the problem. And do you know why he's crying? He's been found out. J.D. Vance pointed the finger and said, you've got us into this mess. Lavrov there basically reaffirming this and going, look, you want to be part of talks now? Where have you been? Arguing with yourselves. Oh, we've got to give more weapons to Ukraine, but not my country. Oh, we've got to put sanctions on Russia, but not my country. Oh, we can't be using Russian energy. But not my country. We've got to go after Putin. But if we do, he might retaliate with nuclear weapons. We've got to get peace. But no one can talk to Putin. That's terrible. If Trump talks to Putin, that's appeasement. This is the blimmin' problem with the lot of them.
Yeah, and J.D. Vance was also right to call out the fact that freedom in Europe has been in collapse. In Germany, under this man, under Merkel's policies, a woman was prosecuted for defaming her rapist, a man that had raped her. She got a longer sentence for defaming him, for saying mean words about him online than he did for that action.
Disgusting.
In this country, we have allowed it to drift into a stage in which people have been arrested for silently praying in their own heads.
Yeah.
The freedoms that we protect in Europe, and by the way, the freedoms in Europe were protected, were defended, were safeguarded with the blood of Americans that came over here 60, 70 years ago to protect each and every one of us, to protect those freedoms, have been in slow and steady erosion under the likes of this man who just think they know best.
Yeah.
They just think they know best. They think they know what is and isn't allowed to be said online. They think it'll be fine if you just leave it in their hands. But what has happened when we've left it in their hands? The state of play in Europe for everybody has got irretrievably, undeniably, visibly worse in the last 20 to 30 years. These people sent us down into the gutter, and now they are determined that their own position, gravitating above it, loftily issuing their edicts from these grand conferences, should never, ever, ever even be questioned.
Yeah.
Should he do so?
Right, and this is the thing. J.D. Vance hasn't just pointed the finger of accusation at Europe. Let's be fair, Trump and Vance have done this to their own country under the Biden administration, and rightly so. Doges are a sight to behold as they pour through what US aid has been spent on, and you find is really quite remarkable stuff. They say end of this waste and the sort of dissemination of mad leftist ideologies, which frankly are designed to destroy the West and Western values and make us weaker. Well, shall we have a little look at some of our own things going on here? And this is without actually having a full doging of things like the Department of Foreign Commonwealth Office, whatever it is called. It's changed its name. It keeps having a rebrand. Basically, the people who dole out foreign aid. Britain spends $15 billion a year on overseas aid. Remember that 22 billion black hole? Well, didn't need to exist, did it? British taxes are being squandered on, here's some examples. Shrimp farms in Bangladesh. What's that supposed to be doing? Poetry workshops in Colombian jails. Oh, that's a real Marshall Programme. That's going to keep Europe safe, isn't it? Let's make some shrimp farms in Bangladesh and teach skinheads in Colombia to, I don't know, quote Shakespeare. And gender lectures in Kenya. I used to live in Kenya, and I'm pretty sure that if you go over, you might have a bit of pocket of wokery in Nairobi, but you go up to, I don't know, go to Nakuru or somewhere else, or Nyanza province, and you start telling them that women can have penises, you'll probably be attacked by a load of angry men. Ridiculous. But I just can't. We have been talking about foreign aid for a long time, and I've always had the position that when foreign aid is used well, and especially if it's used to actually create things like foreign direct investment. So actually, instead of telling women they can have penises in Kenya, help them build a tea factory. So we're not having to sort of, buy tea from Mombasa, ship it to be processed in Poland and then to UK shelves. Let's just get that directly from Kenya, build up their economy, make sure they've got more grey-coloured jobs. And in return, much like China does with these things, when China says, I'm going to build a motorway or a railway line, they then go, can we access your minerals? That's the way to do things, not teaching people in prisons about, whatever poetry is they're apparently being taught. It's a madness.
Yeah, look, in a sense, 130 grand for Bangladeshi shrimp's health sounds like a joke. But you know what? This week it's been really, really cold, and there will be pensioners in this country that have literally frozen to death in their own houses because the government tells us it cannot afford winter fuel pension payments to pensioners. We have got farmers that have killed themselves in recent months because they are so terrified that they won't be able to hand over their business to their children, that they can't make the economics work, that they are in a long line of unable to hand on what that family has always done. We are told that we haven't got the money to defend our country properly, and yet we have a government that is prepared to write cheque after cheque after cheque to this nonsense, and loads of it. 110 grand for a conference on gender-based disinformation in Kenya, 470 grand for a criminal justice advisor in Somalia, 500 grand to gender mainstream strategy in Jordan. This is a joke. This is disgusting. Civil servants, government ministers have written cheques, have signed on the dotted line to hand our money to foreigners overseas for projects that inch an iota of common sense would tell you are nonsense. At the same time, our own pensioners are freezing to death in their own houses because we aren't prepared to support them through what has been a very cold winter again. If this isn't enough to make you mad, if this isn't enough to make you sick to the back teeth, I don't know what will. Yes, it's funny. Yes, it's a bit of a joke, but this money was meant to go to keeping British people safe, healthy, well in their own homes, a task that our government seems unable to perform.
Right, it's our money. This is the thing. People talk about government money like, oh, who does it belong to? Us. We put it in there in the first place. I think that impassioned speech by you is utterly, utterly brilliant. I couldn't agree with it more. Just look at this. It just makes me sick. I tell you what, though, I've just spotted here. Apparently, we were paying money for cybersecurity in India. Do you know who's one of the biggest providers of cybersecurity is in the world?
India.
Yeah, and which company?
Ah, yes.
Infosys.
Yes.
I'm just going to leave it there. You can Google about Infosys if you like. Right, let's have a little listen to a voice note now. This is Trevor. He's talking about sending troops to Ukraine.
Morning, Alex. Nice to have you on during the week. Just a quick thing about Starmer. Even if he was able to raise the defence spending, where is he going to get the troops from? Because he has spent his entire life attacking the white working class. Who's going to want to fight for them? I don't know anybody. I don't know if you do, but we could always send our electric-powered jets that Ed Miliband's going to commission to do the fighting for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he demonises the very people he's now expecting to defend the interests of Europe. This is what they're all doing. This is what all those Europeans are doing. They're basically sitting there going, mass migration, devastate your communities. When you want to vote to say, look, we don't want this, you're called far right, you're not allowed to vote for the party you want, they will find legal ways of trying to prevent them from standing, gerrymandering the democratic process. They constantly kick the white working classes in their own nations, basically mock their values, take away their ability to speak, to vote, and then they turn around and go, we need you now to go and defend Europe. We've done nothing wrong. Stinking hypocrisy. Let's listen to a voice note now from Anna.
Morning, Alex. Anna, sorry. Alex, I am the world's biggest patriot. I love my country, but Starmer is not deserving of one drop of British blood. He is a disgrace. He has subjugated us. He has denigrated us. He has put us into prison for speaking the truth. And now he wants the white, working class, far-right population to go fight his ego war. He can go himself, Alex, because not one person should step forward. I have more of an issue with Starmer than I do with Putin. I loathe him. Sorry to sound hateful, Alex, but I loathe him. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And this is basically what J.D. Vance is saying. What have you done to your own continent? How have you demoralised your people? How have you allowed Western values to slip away? How have you not listened to them and instead silenced them when they have said something's going terribly wrong here in my country? Before we go to break, I'm going to lighten the mood a bit because we've been shouting, haven't we? We've been getting very hot under the collar, salmon. It's good. That's why I call it communal catharsis. It's good to get it out. We can all then go and have a lovely afternoon, have a pint somewhere, have a smile on our faces. well, while we've still got the pubs, about 1,000 of those are set to close with the national insurance costs. Liam sent a message saying, I was listening and I heard you say that British troops would possibly be going to Ukraine. I've left already, but in case they try to call me up, could you tell Keir I can't go because I only like British chicken nuggets? Okay, pretty much sums up the sad farce that is 21st century Britain. OK, going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we want to hear from you. You can shout, you can scream, you can rage, you can cry, you can laugh, you can joke, whatever it is, just do it with us. 03444991000 is the number to call to join the communal catharsis. You can also send me a WhatsApp to that number or leave me a voice note. That voice note from Anna I thought was really touching, actually. I think that is how desperate people are feeling. 87222 is the number. If you want to send a text message, you have to write the word talk before you send your text message, because that's what helps it to wend its way through the various channels of communication here to the screens in front of me. We're on X at talkTV, and Sam and I are going to be back just after this.
Be really cautious before making declarations like that. We are still in a hot war. We've just seen Russia take about 600 square miles over winter from Ukraine. So under what circumstances is he saying this should happen? He's saying peacekeepers. That suggests once a peace deal's in place. But we're not looking for any peace deal here. We're looking for a deal that ensures that we don't see more war in Europe, not just a cessation of immediate fighting. So I think it's quite risky to suddenly announce that you're going to put British troops on the ground without having set out the parameters of what that looks like.
When Britain was in the EU, they had the role of being the bridge between America and Europe, but because they were in both camps. But because of Brexit, we lost that role. There is no bridge. Trump is already actively excluding Britain from negotiations. He's even excluding Zelensky.
Right.
So they're having a...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. I hope we didn't sort of break your eardrums with our, what would you call it? Our passionate segment. We got things off our chest, didn't we? I mean, I've never seen you like that, Sam. That was, I loved it, by the way, but I
think people should be angry about what is being done to our country under our very noses.
I genuinely do think there is something about the British, this stiff upper-lipped thing, that it's amazing how extreme the situation is getting and how everyone's just sort of basically when you go to farmers' protests, they're sort of quite joyful occasions. It's a good old get-together, a sort of agricultural jamboree, loads of people in barber jackets and having a good old time going for a pint afterwards. Yes, making an important point. When you saw the farmers' protests going on in Europe, they weren't holding back. They got out their muck spreaders and were manuring Parliament and stuff like that. The French with the tractors on the motorways, just putting hay bales, animals everywhere. I mean, we are very polite. We don't really do the sort of, setting cars on fire like they do over in France and stuff like that. And yet, when you look at how crazy things are, it's amazing. The other thing is, of course, Starmer put the fear of God into everybody with the reaction to the Southport protests, because they were essentially protests that suddenly became these riots. I have my own views on what went on there. Because if they were sort of genuine riots where people, but no one was, look, gosh, I've got to be careful how I say this now, but they were controlled quite quickly with the fear, with these people are all far right, we're going to send you into prison, the televised trials. And yet a lot of people serving time in prison as a result of these riots were either long-term criminals anyway, who had, had a big track record of looting and robbing and causing disruption and hooliganism, who sort of went along for the ride. Why they're out on the streets in the first place beggars belief. But then there are other people who just, I genuinely think this, right? With some of those people, if not all of those people, who ended up going to prison, they were taken into the cop shop. They were told by the Crown Prosecution Service, plead guilty. They did that so there wasn't a trial. If there had been a trial where it had to be proven that whatever they had put on social media did incite violence or did cause rioting, A, I think it would have been very hard to do, and B, technically a lot of their cases would have been prejudiced by Sir Keir Starmer telling everyone on national television that this is exactly what had happened. And I think we're sort of... The British are very good at forgetting and just going, oh, well, never mind, that happened. But it was quite horrifying what happened to the judicial system in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And the lack of trust, the loss of trust at that two-tier justice system, and I think that is sadly exactly what we saw, will take a very, very, very long time to recover. And you're right. We have seen the small number of cases in which people pled not guilty coming to trial in recent weeks, and time again people are being acquitted because the laws in this country still, just about, it is still a free country. People don't say that anymore, but this is a free country. You can say what you like, even if the police service in this country seem to be inventing laws all the time, like it's now a criminal offence to burn a Quran. No, it isn't. People in this country need to stand up for these rights, because otherwise they're going to get pushed around by a very small but a very dedicated army of people that are intent upon pushing their agenda on all of the rest of us. You need to stand up, you need to fight back, and you need to get angry.
Indeed you do. But in a nice British way. We're not, I mean, we'll be in prison now, you saying that. Well, they'll be coming and feeling our collars. We'll be carted out of the studios and, held on in remand for like 3 days for inciting violence. Right, let's go to the phone lines and get ourselves out of hot water and speak to Matthew, who's in Bolton. Hi, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Alex. Good morning, Sam. You're doing a sterling job there between you both.
Thank you. What do you want to talk about, my darling?
I just wanted to highlight JD Vance's speech and really point out it was a whole bunch of common sense.
Yeah.
And the UK and Europe have seriously got their heads buried in the sand, and they need to take it out of the sand quick before we walk ourselves into another war, Alex.
This is the thing. So I was at an event this weekend with the great and the good of right-wingery from around the world, and we were discussing European leaders, but we were discussing the JD Vance speech. And what I found so remarkable is he's standing on stage just basically saying what is going on. This is the day after yet another terror attack in Munich, the exact city that they're all in. And he's saying your open borders are a problem. The people you've let into your country are a problem. He even said, look, we've done this ourselves. It was a problem for us too. He said, you're not listening to your people. There have been elections being denied. We know that. I mean, loads of local elections cancelled in May in this country. People have been sent to prison for things that, frankly, they shouldn't have been sent to prison for. And I find this really quite disturbing. He's just listing facts. And you look at them sitting in the audience. Some were sort of laughing, sneering, snickering, sniggering, raising their eyebrows, rolling their eyes at each other. And the whole time this is happening, right, they talk about the far right, the extreme right, like a phenomenon that is, ghouls have taken over and it's not our fault. No, these are just other political parties. And the reason they are going wild in the polls is because these people sitting in that room are not listening to the public, who can see full well what's going on. And what I don't get is this, and this is the game I was playing at our little get-together over the weekend, is deluded or deliberate. Are some of these people gaslighting us deliberately, saying things because they know the truth of the situation and just want to lie to us because there's a bigger agenda, or they've created a crisis and don't want to admit it? Is this deliberate? Or are these people deluded? Are the sort of 0.01% of the European population in these positions of power, the elites who are our judges and our politicians and the bigwigs of legacy media, are they actually just deluded? Do they not get it? Do they think that they're the sane ones and the other 99% are all crazy? And I think actually you can play the game of putting people in different categories. You can actually go deluded or deliberate and start siphoning them off into those silos. Matthew, thank you ever so much. Right, we've got a little clip of Kemi Badenoch. She's been speaking at ARC, which is the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference this morning. That is a big, again, a right-wing get-together that takes place now in London at the Excel Centre. Shall we have a little listen to what she said?
Western civilization is in crisis. Our ideas and our culture have dominated the world for well over 2 centuries. This is not a crisis of values. It's a crisis of confidence that has set in at exactly the same time that we face existential threats. On the left, this self-doubt manifests as an embarrassment of the West's legacy, and in extremists, a hatred of Western history and even its culture.
There we go. I mean, weirdly, we were just saying, weren't we, before that clip, deluded or deliberate, but this is what's been going on. Is it deliberate, or are people deluded? That the elites this is?
Well, Kemi Badenoch's challenge, of course, is that she's leading a party that was in power for the last 14 years when so many of these challenges, when so many of these problems, when so many of these social ills seeped into our society. And there'll be many people at home listening to that just think, well, you were in charge until, 9 months ago now. What were you doing about it then?
Yeah. Well, no, this is it. The legacy parties are in big trouble because people are just not going to buy into them because they feel they've been gaslit. But she is making, I think, a very important point. Thankfully, I don't sort of, diminish anybody who tries to make this very clear and starts the fight back. We need everyone doing that. Should we lighten things up a bit? If Rachel Reeves has come after your cash and you feel you might need a little more, here in Talk Towers, we're going to try and help you on your way. We have got a competition, which means you could be in receipt of £25,000. Here's how.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus 1 standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
There you go. Good luck. Do enter, and you never know. It could be you. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about a violent Pole, convicted of 6 occasions of 9 offences. He's allowed to stay in the UK. Of course he is. You'd never guess why. Back after this.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Well, I did promise you before the break we were going to reveal why a violence poll, Conrad McCockey, I don't know how you say his name, maybe it isn't that. If it's not, I don't care actually. But anyway, he was convicted on 6 occasions of 9 offences. You'd think the very first occasion that he's convicted of crimes, he should be told to go back to Poland, which is, you know, a perfectly safe country. But no, an immigration tribunal judge ruled that Conrad was able to stay in the UK because he had a close enough relationship with his nephew for his deportation to be a breach of his rights to family life under Article 8 of, yep, you've guessed it, the European Convention of Human Rights. So you can basically be, he's an alcoholic as well, you can be an alcoholic, violent monster, convicted of violence, domestic abuse. There was a restraining order to prevent him approaching his ex-partner. And the reason he stays is because he's a father figure to his nephew. What? He sounds like an alcoholic wife beater. How that man managed to stay on the grounds of being a father figure to somebody who's not even his own son is beyond belief. We're also going to be talking about the fact that Deliveroo has had to sack more than 100 drivers because they've done a little audit on whether all the people zipping around London bringing takeaways to the great and the good are who they say they are. I'm sure the number is much bigger than that. I mean, blimey, if 1 in 12 people are in London illegally, they're everywhere. They're in your nail bars, they're in the Turkish barber shops, they're delivering your food, they're driving Ubers, they're working in restaurants, they're, well, dealing drugs. Crack down on a lot of it, I say. Right, let's, without further ado, speak now to Robert Bates. Robert is, of course, the research director at the Centre for Migration Control, a big friend of this channel. Hi, Robert, how are you doing?
Morning, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Where do you want to begin with all of this? Yet another mad story with a judge ruling ECHR nonsense. The canon of British law is now just a farcical joke, isn't it?
I think that's true, and I think a lot of people who have been following the series of stories that the Telegraph have been putting out will be now really analysing whether we actually have a judicial system when it comes to immigration and a set of laws that are working in the favour of the British public. You read some of these cases that we've seen over the last week, and in many instances they admit perfectly candidly that public interest would be in favour of these individuals being deported, but because they've got a nephew that likes chicken nuggets, or because they've got, in this instance, a father figure type relationship with their nephew, they can't be removed. So this is putting the rights and interests and concerns of individuals that have frankly offered nothing to the country and have actually caused us a lot of harm above the rights of the British public. And I don't know if you remember, during the Brexit debates, we had the big Daily Mail front page referring to those judges that were trying to stop Brexit as the enemy of the people. I actually think that's a much more apt description of many of those individuals that are currently working in the immigration tribunals, because it's perfectly clear now that they don't see their role as actually protecting the British public, making sure that we're safe, but they see it on this kind of human rights crusade to keep as many ne'er-do-wells in the country as possible.
What do we do about them, though? How do we get rid of all these judges? Because the problem is, you know, even if there was a way to get rid of the judges, which is very hard to do unless you want to be labelled a pariah state by the international community, who cares, I say, is the people who are probably set to take over from them are probably going to be even more woke.
Well, that's it. There's a conveyor belt when it comes to the immigration tribunals. All of them are coming from left-wing law firms, many of whom have made a whole career out of opposing Rwanda or causing real nuisance for the Home Office anyway. So the fact that they're then eligible to be elevated into immigration tribunals where they're effectively making decisions in an allegedly impassionate manner is really, really ridiculous to believe. I think we need to completely, to be perfectly honest, scrap the immigration tribunal system. We either need to just have the Home Office's decision as being final, or if we do want some form of process to continue, then we need to go down what they have in the magistrates' courts, where we have individuals chosen from the public who are advised by a clerk on what the law is, but their common sense is input into the system. Because at the moment, the process is taking place without a semblance of common sense. It's being done on these arcane notions of human rights law and judges that are frankly not British. They don't believe in British legal system, British safety. They're more obliging to international systems and international law, which really isn't a very palatable system to continue with.
No, I agree. I think we need to get rid of the Human Rights Act. It's not about human rights at all. It's the Loophole Act. We need to get rid of supremacy of judges, actually, and bring sovereignty back to Parliament. We need to get out of the ECHR. There's a lot of things that have to happen before we're going to see common sense prevail, one would imagine. Let's talk now about Deliveroo, who's had to sack more than 100 drivers in a crackdown on illegal migrants. The London-listed food delivery giant has called 105 workers who illegally shared their rider accounts with undocumented workers. This is tip of the iceberg stuff, isn't it? Because we know now that essentially 1 in 12 people in London are illegal. And actually, in random checks back in April 2023, 2 in 5 delivery riders stopped. Were found to be working illegally. This is the thing, when people come into the UK on boats or in the back of lorries or fake documents, fake student visas, whatever it may be, there's plenty of jobs out there for them to go to. It's not even in London. You go to most high streets now, even in, you know, sleepy little rural areas, and you've got all of these vape shops, the souvenir shops, the candy stores, the Turkish barbers, not doing any business. And you think, what are these about? They're just fronts for other things, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's a huge pull factor. The promise of finding employment if you break into the UK is now, it's inevitable individuals will be able to be hooked up into these networks where they're either placed in these kind of arrangements that you see with Deliveroo, or they can go and work for a vape shop, a car wash, or all manner of the businesses that you just listed. I think, you know, the 100 figure, I woke up this morning and read that, and I assumed it was from the last couple of weeks these individuals have been identified, but that's over the course of a year. And as you say, 100 is a tiny number by the sheer proliferation of this practice taking place that we all know is taking place. The number of times my housemate has ordered Deliveroo and expected a woman to be delivering it, and it's a masked man that's about 6'4". It's an absolutely ridiculous state of affairs, and I think we need to start as individuals voting with our feet. So I think if you are concerned about the illegal migration issue, you shouldn't be using Deliveroo, you shouldn't be using car washes, you should order your vape shops from Tesco, your vapes from Tesco, and not go to those vape shops. You shouldn't be going to those businesses that you think probably have improper employment practices. But we also need the state to be doing some more as well. We need them to be starting to levy really hefty fines, because frankly we've got over 1 million people in this country here illegally, and if we want to start removing a large number of them, we're going to need the funds to do so. We were, you know, the Rachel Reeves is going on about this black hole, so we clearly don't have the funds available. If we want to properly make a real deportation drive, then we're going to need the funds to do so. So that entails seizing assets off these individuals that are working illegally. It also entails tripling, quadrupling the fines that we are levelling on these businesses, because the figure at the moment is about £20,000 if improper employment practices are found. That's negligible when you factor in the fact that most businesses will figure they're not going to get sussed out. So we need to quadruple that. We need to make it a real deterrent, and then we've got a bit of a kitty to actually start getting those planes oiled up and ready to go.
Well, this is it. Of course, the judges will stop half of it, but we need boots on the ground. I mean, when you look at my particular street in London, which used to have lots of different, varied shops, of course, the pandemic put paid to a lot of them, and now, no doubt, national insurance, employers' national insurance contributions going to kill off the rest of viable businesses. But now the whole of my road is just full of these really dodgy-looking businesses, and I don't see any immigration lawyers coming around asking these people what they're doing. They're feeling collars. Sam, do you remember back when Theresa May had that ad van, and what did it say? Sort of like, if you're here illegally, we're going to find you. And I was like, you can't do that. That's nasty. That's so unkind. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like I said, if you actually deported everyone in London here illegally, there'd be basically no one left in London.
Well, and this is what we see time and time again with politicians, particularly in the Labour Party. They say, oh yes, we're more than happy to deport people. We need to get migration back under control. But the moment you even come close to doing anything to deal with it, the howls of rancour come up. That was a van that said go back home. It was all it did was say go back home if you're here illegally. Frankly, we should be in a situation in which we are rounding up hundreds of thousands of people every year who are in this country, who have broken into our country, who have flagrantly breached our laws, and we should be sending them as far away as we possibly can. Instead, we can't even tell them to go home without howls of outrage from the left of British politics. It's disgrace. There's no wonder that we can't get on top of this problem.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Thank you, Sam. Thank you as well to Robert Bates, Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control. Oh, this story's never going to go anywhere, is it? I mean, it's so baked into the system. There's so many things that have to be resolved. We need a change of government more than anything, because Sir Keir Starmer is international law, got to follow international law. He's not going to do anything about it, is he? Smash the gangs, my backside. Right, when we come back after the break, something that Sir Keir Starmer does love doing something about, however, is free speech. We're going to be discussing that after this.
Inevitably, when you've given up your the mainstay of your artillery, which was the AS-90, to Ukraine, when you've given them your tanks, Storm Shadow missiles, and so many other munitions, and of course a vast amount that we've helped to procure internationally, of course that has an impact on the ability of your own armed forces. When I became Shadow Defence Secretary, I said to Labour, you've got to increase defence spending now. I was Defence Procurement Minister. I came up with a lot of the detail of our plan to get to 2.5%. And what was really strong about it was it gave multi-year certainty to the MOD.
When Britain was in the EU, they had the role of being the bridge between America and Europe, but because they were in both camps. But because of Brexit, we lost that role. There is no bridge. Trump is already actively excluding Britain from negotiations. He's even excluding Zelensky.
Right.
So they're having a meeting over there. They don't really know what they're talking about because they're not privy to any negotiation minutes. So what are they going to be discussing?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Do you remember the good old days when you could say things without worrying you were going to get your collar felt and be dragged off to clink? I do. Oh, it's a simpler time, wasn't it? And also, do you remember the good old days when there was common sense in Europe? Things like border control and defending Christianity and deporting people here illegally. I remember those as well. Well, J.D. Vance also remember those, which is why when the Munich Security Conference was taking place on Friday, he said that the biggest threat that he's worried about is not Russia, actually, but Europe. not China, but Europe. It's not any other external actor, he said. What I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Oh, the eye rolls. Oh, the consternation. Oh, the dramatic, the crying. We've got that wonderful clip of that man crying at this, the guy who organised that conference, and everyone's like clapping him for crying. Weak, weak, weak. Well, you wouldn't be surprised to learn that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, when asked what he thought about this, said that he doesn't agree. He says that he thinks that the biggest threat is the threat from Russia, made by Europe, one would argue. And then Mr. Reynolds has said, let's be clear, we don't have blasphemy laws in the UK. That's the right thing. I say that as a Christian. No one is arrested for what they're praying about. Because, of course, J.D. Vance brought up that particular case where a man was praying for the baby that was aborted, his own baby that was aborted outside an abortion clinic, and got arrested for it. Well, Mr. Reynolds might say we don't have blasphemy laws in the UK. I would say, yet. What's this whole Islamophobia thing going to be about? Let's speak now to Dr. Philip Kisserly, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Great to have you on the programme, Philip. Where do we begin for this? Shall we just start with J.D. Vance and the point that he was making, a point that Kemi Badenoch has just reinforced at the ARC conference at the Excel Centre in London? We do have a problem with free speech in Europe, don't we?
Oh my, we do. Alex, it's great to see you. Yes, we do. And you just made the point about Islamophobia. Actually, it might be a really good idea to start with that, because that was a few weeks ago, wasn't it? Angela Rayner has set up a council for Islamophobia, which crucially links Islamophobia with race, which means you are racist if you say anything whatsoever about Islam. That is essentially and will be a blasphemy law by proxy. So we are in a terrible situation. And don't forget, you mentioned boots on the ground before. We have Islamists who have boots on the ground in this country. So I think we need to start with the real issue. The real issue is the clamping down of free speech. The real issue is that we are not allowed to discuss things. And if we can't discuss things, if we can't see ideas, work them through, if we're not allowed to kind of take ideas and ridicule them and ridicule religions, then there is no point worrying about Russia and China and North Korea, because essentially we are becoming Russia, China and North Korea.
But I also think this is being used as a tactic of the state, because for a long time now there's been a form of intentional, unintentional social engineering where the domestic populations of many European countries feel like they now play a minor role, that they are lower down in the pecking order in their own countries. And all the ways they want to protest this have been silenced. They're not allowed to say things in public because it's shameful to do so. It's taboo. They're not allowed to vote for the parties that will be that voice for them, because then they're called Nazis and fascists and far right, if those parties are even allowed to contend elections. And now what we've seen in the United Kingdom is when it really does reach boiling point and people say, I've had enough, I'm not being listened to at the ballot box, I'm not being listened to when I turn on legacy media or listen to the debates in Parliament, nobody's talking like me, no one's sounding like me, as they went to the streets. Because if you deny all of those things, that is basically the last resort. Or just, I don't know, vented on social media. And these people were sent to prison. And you have to ask, where next? What happens after this?
Yes, I mean, you're talking about the Online Safety Act of 2023, in which upwards of 290 people have been prosecuted for malicious communications and alleged false information. This is so frightening. You know, the people who are defining false information are the Lived Experience Brigade, the My Truth people. So it's almost Orwellian in a way. And what we are really talking about here is we're talking about speech crime, and you're just talking through all of those things there as you did. It just took me straight back to the protests of summer last year, where people were actually called criminals by this government before they'd even stood trial. Okay, they were called far right and criminals before they even stood trial. So we're in a terrible situation, and you can see this manifesting itself in different ways. I mean, there've been a couple of polls lately, in which one poll for young people, Gen Zs, said that most of them actually wanted a dictatorship because they had no faith in democracy. Another poll, I think, was just last week here. I've just written it down. Was about only 11% of them would fight for the country in any circumstance. So we have a real problem, and it's that people are indoctrinated, people are educated into hating this country, and once the fundamentals, the free speech, free expression, the stuff that our society is built on, that they are taught to hate, once that goes, you can't get it back. Okay, that's it. That's the end. All of the human rights, all of the so-called freedoms that they want for particular groups, they will go. It's the end.
I mean, is there hope? Because some might look at the MAGA movement in America, where they've sort of wrested back control of free speech away from what was increasingly perniciously happening under the Democrats as well, maybe not in quite the same way as in the UK. Elon Musk buying X seems to have been quite a liberating experience for much of Western thought. Is there still hope that we can actually restore common sense, or are we really on a pathway to oblivion? I say this because actually I think that, yes, we can look at how Orwellian this crackdown is, but I think the net result, and when I said to you, what next, what happens next, I actually think the net result of this continued crackdown on one hand at allowing the public to express at the ballot box or express to one another their reaction to what, how their countries are being governed, and at the same time constantly increasing the bad policy-making decisions, flooding the country with people from cultures which do not represent our own and don't share our values, is it actually creates a genuine societal tinderbox?
Yes, I think it does. And I think what we're seeing is a government that is frightened, a government that's running scared and doing crazy things because it's running scared. So what people need to do is vote with their feet, and they need to speak out, and they need to be brave. If ever there was a time for being brave, this is a time for being brave. And more people are being brave, and more people are doing it. You, for example, with New Culture Forum, have just made an incredibly brave film about speaking out against abuse. Okay, so if more people do that and more people respond to that kind of thing, which they are doing in ways that I've never known before, people are incredibly fed up, and people are frightened. They're frightened of the government. They're frightened of what this government is promoting, and people are beginning to speak out in ways that haven't happened. So it's people power, and yes, there may well be a cultural and societal shift there, because I look to the States and I'm just flabbergasted at what's happened. It is amazing. There is a cultural shift there. Things are happening, and yes, possibly it can happen here, but we cannot be complacent. We really have to push, and it is actually down to people. It's down to people like you and me in media and on social media, but it's also down to people on the street as well. They have to speak back, and they have to be brave.
I couldn't agree more. Dr. Philip Kisserly, it's brilliant to have you on the programme, and your quick thoughts, Sam.
Yeah, they are deliberately attempting us to stop speaking out, and the question is why, to what end, what are they trying to cover up, and what are they getting out of it all?
Well, indeed. This is what I say, deluded or deliberate. I don't know what's going on with many of the European leaders at the moment, whether they can't see the wood from the trees and the crisis that they've plunged our countries into, whether they can, and they have to live in denial because they know they were the authors of the perma crisis, or perhaps it's because the policies are going to have to be put in place to reverse things for them unconscionable. I don't know the answer. Right, don't go anywhere. We're taking a short break now, but the last hour of my show is coming up after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Well, it's all kicking off today when it comes to conflabs around geopolitical crises in the world. We have Marco Rubio over in Riyadh in Saudi to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to kick off those talks between, at the moment, Russia and America about potentially a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, a panic summit amongst European leaders in Paris because they're not at the table. Many of those European leaders have been saying about Trump's 90-minute conversation with Vladimir Putin last week that it shows appeasement, very worried that actually Trump is going to do the bidding of Putin, allow him to get away with that invasion. And of course, many of them still reeling from the comments of J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Summit, where he said, I'm less worried about Russia. I'm more worried about you guys and how you're governing the continent. So much to unpack. Well, the latest news is that Russia has said it has no plans to give up territory it has seized in Ukraine. Its Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov being the one giving us that information ahead, well, not us directly, of course, giving the media at large that information ahead of US-Russia talks expected to begin Tuesday. Sergei Lavrov has said there could be no thought of Moscow giving away land to Kyiv. What sort of territorial concessions do you want, he challenged, that we give up Russian speakers or rare earths? Meanwhile, Zelensky has said that he had no idea that these talks were going to take place, but apparently Kyiv has said that Zelensky will be then going out to Saudi on the Wednesday. And amidst all of this, Sir Keir Starmer has put an exclusive article in the Telegraph today saying that were it be needed that European forces become peacekeepers in Ukraine after some sort of deal and perhaps a creation of a demilitarized zone, he's ready and willing to put British troops over there. And he doesn't yet have the pathway, though, of how the UK is going to meet the 2.5% of GDP defence spending commitment that he has already agreed to, while many people in the armed forces are saying we need more than that. The idea that 2.5 is going to even touch the sides is for the birds. So much to talk about, and I'm joined by an excellent guest now, Lord Kim Darroch, former UK ambassador to the US and ex-national security advisor. Lord Darroch, really great to have you on the programme.
Hi, Alex.
First of all, I want to get your thoughts on what's going on here with America. Trump had said throughout the campaign that he's going to make sure that there is peace in Ukraine. I remember the footage of him walking in America, Zelensky by his side, and sort of Zelensky looking rather stunned as Trump said down to the camera, we're going to come up with a deal. Well, he's doing it, isn't he? Is there reason for European leaders to be fearful, or is this long overdue?
Well, first of all, Alex, who doesn't want an end to this war in Ukraine and all the death and destruction it has caused? But the problem here started, in a sense, with the terms of the Trump announcement last week about his telephone conversation with Vladimir Putin. Now, I think it's a good thing that the president and Putin are talking, although it has brought Putin out of international pariah status and suddenly made him, as it were, a functioning leader on the world stage. But nevertheless, set that aside, it's good that they talked. But what Trump said afterwards was basically a very unilateral statement. He said, we're going to sort this out. We're going to get a peace deal or a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. And he didn't talk about either Ukraine being part of that process or indeed the Europeans being part of that process. And that's what set all this agitation going both in Kyiv and in Europe around this. Now, you've had American officials, Marco Rubio has said, of course, Ukraine is going to be involved, though there is not an invitation, so far as I know, to the talks which start in Saudi Arabia tomorrow for Ukraine. And on the face of it, you can't really have a negotiation about what happens in a war on Ukrainian soil without Ukraine being part of that. So that has to be sorted out at some point. On the Europeans, look, I understand why Europeans are saying, well, we should be involved, because the Americans are saying that Europe must contribute the main part, maybe all of, any peacekeeping force that is required in Ukraine after a ceasefire, and any security guarantees that Ukraine is asking for as part of the deal. So, there is a role for Europe, it seems, in American eyes on all this. So you need some level of involvement and participation. I don't myself think it has to be around the table every hour of the talks, but Europe does need to be consulted. You can't just have this responsibility dumped on Europe. So I understand the agitation, but I also think you have to recognize that this is a serious attempt by the US president to solve a war that has scarred Europe for the past more than 1,000 days. And so in a sense, I think Keir Starmer is striking the right note by saying, well, look, we'd be prepared to contribute troops, but also saying it needs to be the right sort of deal, which is the key here. What would Ukraine be offered as part of a ceasefire deal?
Right. I want to pick up on something you said there, talking about a lot of European leaders saying we want to be part of these talks. Well, it seems to me, especially at the outbreak of the invasion, no one was singing off the same hymn sheet in Europe. There was so much prevarication when it came to what levels of sanctions should be applied, whether or not people should or could continue using Russian gas. Germany, of course, being very hesitant about the use of German weaponry in Ukraine, still hesitant now about the use of some of their long-range missiles and tanks. So the idea that inviting all the European leaders in to get things sorted out once and for all is going to be a solution, to me, seems absolutely mad. And I can understand American impatience. But do you think that the people advising Donald Trump, those around him, and of course this you were ex-national security advisor over here, do you think that he understands that actually, if you look at that territorial map right now of what Russia has managed to take so far, following on from 2014 when he was allowed to get away with taking Crimea, that he gets it, that this, yes, it's about rare earth minerals. I'm sure that, well, Russia, US has already said themselves in return for helping out Ukraine, they want access to those rare earth minerals themselves. But this is also about the Black Sea and how that is often used to mess about with global food supply chains, fertilizer, wheat, oils. We saw global inflation as a result of all of this. And that actually, when it comes to the anti-Western access, if you have Russia controlling the Black Sea, Iran controlling the Red Sea, China trying to control all the seas, we're in big trouble. Do you think Trump gets that?
Well, a good question. First thing to say, Alex, is it's a fair point to say that Europe has not exactly been unified through this war, and probably still isn't, because I can promise you that in Central Europe, they can't wait for this war to end. They are looking after a lot of Ukrainian refugees. It feels very close to them, much closer than it does feel to us in the UK. And it's done a lot of damage to the European economy, especially the Central European economy. So yes, they want the war to end. And certainly if you look at some of the statements that come out of Hungary, for example, they're basically not on the same line as the more Western European countries are saying. So fair point. But this is the moment when, if they want to contribute, Europe will have to try and get a united line. And if they don't get a united line, then the Americans will not pay much attention to what Europe is saying. On your point about the geopolitics of this, yes, of course you're right. I mean, Ukraine is a major global grain supplier, and you need access through the Black Sea to get that, and world prices go up if Ukrainian supplies are constrained, in the same way that Houthi attacks on Western shipping in the Red Sea are causing lots of damage to the global economy themselves. So keeping sea lanes open is crucial. There's a lot of geopolitics around this, and that's why a solution, a ceasefire, and preferably a ceasefire leading to some sort of peace deal, is so important for all of the Western economies, all of the world. And it's right, therefore, that the Americans should be trying to take a lead in sorting this out. But I mean, it does need to be a deal that is fair to Ukraine, because what you can't dissent from is that this was an act of naked aggression by Russia. They've captured something like 1/5 of Ukrainian territory. They would, if it hadn't been for Ukrainian resistance, have gone further and tried to destroy the Zelensky government. And you can't just sign off on that and say that's all fine, we'll just forget that and leave the status quo.
Finally, is one of the big issues here that one of the ways you were speaking earlier about Putin having been a pariah until Trump decided to sit down and talk to him. Unfortunately, he might have been a pariah to Europeans, but to a lot of the rest of the world, they've still been buying his oil and his gas, and there have been various ways of countries avoiding sanctions. And actually, that sort of led to this crisis in the first place. And perhaps one thing that Donald Trump's going to be able to do to put Putin back in his box is to really hurt Russia with energy domination and drill, baby, drill. Do you think European leaders are now going to be able to take a more pragmatic approach towards their own domestic policy to make sure they're not enabling the dictators of this world from having an upper hand by actually letting go of some of these more idealistic policies that have dominated discourse for decades?
Yeah, well, in the end, again, there's some fair points here. In the end, Alex, realpolitik demands that pariah status or no pariah status, he's not going to be defeated on the battlefield, so you have to talk to the Russians, you have to talk to the Putin regime to get some sort of ceasefire and some sort of process going. So that's just reality, however uncomfortable it feels. More generally, look, if America chooses, with its new policy of renewed exploitation of hydrocarbons, oil and gas, if it chooses to put those out in large quantities on the world market, that will affect the world energy prices, especially the oil prices, no doubt. And if it comes down significantly, that really damages the Russian economy. That's the main thing that they are making money from, that they're selling. So Trump has some real leverage over Putin here, which I hope he will use in the negotiations that are about to start.
Fingers crossed, that bringing down energy prices when we've got the highest in the world would be a welcome thing over here in Britain as well. Lord Darrach, fantastic talking to you. I went to university with your son Simon, by the way, a wonderful man indeed. So pass him my best wishes.
Well, there's a piece of news for me. Well, I'll pass that on to him.
Yeah, he used to be a bit of a drinking partner from time to time in St Cuths. Really great guy. Thank you, Lord Darrach. Fantastic having you on the programme. Right, shall we have a bit of a voice note now? Let's hear from Nick.
Good morning, Alex and Sam. We love your show. For the first time in my voting life, and I'm a pensioner, I'm scared of my government. More scared than anything else going in the world, any geopolitical issues that are rumbling at the moment, including Putin. Putin doesn't scare me, our government does. Our government is hell-bent on enforcing its twisted ideology on us, to the extent that it's prepared to burn the house down to see its ideology imposed on us. Its lunacy of net zero, its unbridled immigration of culture change, importing Islamists into the country by the boatload. I am genuinely scared of this government, and I pray that they don't last the next 4 years, though I suppose they probably will. Love your show. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you, Nick. Interesting. I want to pick up on something there and ask you about this, because when people talk about some of the woke ideology, when they talk about the ridiculous energy policy where we're still self-flagellating at the altar of net zero, impoverishing ourselves, playing into the hands of dictators, making sure we've got the highest energy prices on earth. And Nick, they're saying he's more scared of our government than he is of Putin. I think it's fair to point out, actually, that if you look at some of these big lobbying groups and the green activists, when you also look at bots online, which really over-promote some of these more niche ideological viewpoints that nobody's asked for, transing kids and whatever it may be, that actually Russia, Putin, is behind this. So being scared of our government but not Putin is not quite right. You should be scared of our government because they're playing into his hands.
But this is exactly the point that JD Vance made last week, which is, what are we defending here? We are not just defending land, we're not just defending a random assortment of people, we're defending an idea, we're defending a civilization, we're defending 1,000 years or more of historic civilizational development, progress, and all of the rest of it. And all of it is under threat. Yes, it's under threat from dictators. And yes, we know that Russia, for example, has been spreading the craziest of the green ideas. But But I agree with that note, which is to say that it is under assault from within the very city gates. And I think some people are right to be more scared. They're right to be more scared of our own government than of Putin. It is not Vladimir Putin that is coming into this country and locking up people for expressing on social media views and pieces of information that later turn out to be true. We locked up people for saying that the Southport killer was a terrorist. It turned out that he was. Right. It is not Putin that is letting people into the country that are changing the very makeup of our high streets. It's not Vladimir Putin that is going along to businesses that make things, that manufacture things, and saying, no, what you're doing is too bad for the environment. We're going to shut you down and we're going to deindustrialise this country. It's not Vladimir Putin that is making life difficult for Britain's farmers. Our own government seems to have selected a group within this country, a large chunk, that for years and years we've championed, the very people that make this country great, and it has decided that no, you are the enemy within. We don't want you. We don't want the jobs you make. We don't want what you've got to offer, and we don't want to hear from you. There is an enemy within. This government seems to have given into it, and it is very, very, very dangerous indeed.
This government are it, some might say. But no, all very interesting points, and that's the thing. I'm sure Putin is sitting in the Kremlin, you know, sort of like steepling his fingers, delighted at what this government is doing. Right, we're going to take a short break now, and after the break, we want to hear from you. The number to call, 0344 499 1000, if you'd like to throw your two-bit into the hat. 87222 is the number to text us. Put talk before your message. You can use the 0344 499 1000 number to also send us a WhatsApp or leave us a voice note. And we're also on X at talkTV. You're coming up after this.
We need to recognise that this is a very serious moment for the security of Europe. The United States is looking like it's stepping back from NATO in its commitment to help support peace in Europe, and that is very serious indeed. I think it represents extraordinary naivety on the part of President Trump, and the rest of his team. And I'd like to remind your readers that I think it's your viewers that I think it is.
You have to be really cautious before making declarations like that. We are still in a hot war. We've just seen Russia take about 600 square miles over winter from Ukraine. So under what circumstances is he saying this should happen? He's saying peacekeepers. That suggests once a peace deal's in place. But we're not looking for any peace deal here. We're looking for a deal that ensures that we don't see more war in Europe, not just a cessation of immediate fighting. So I think it's quite risky to suddenly announce that you're going to put British troops on the ground without having set out the parameters of what that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Let's get to it and open up the phone lines. And first of all, let's speak to Lyndon in West Yorkshire. Hi, Lyndon.
Hi, Alex.
Right, what do you want to talk about?
Just something that came to mind. With the illegal immigrants costing so much money in the hotels, wouldn't it be a good idea to give that money to the army as they come off the boat, they go into training camps, create a new infantry regiment, and say after 10 years of being in the army, they're offered citizenship?
But, you know, it's an interesting thought. Ironically, a lot of them actually put in ex-army barracks, which is an insult, isn't it, frankly? But I'm going to bring Sam in on this. My concern with that is when you look at who's coming over and where they're coming from, give them access to barracks and guns, and they're going to be using it against us.
We have absolutely no idea who these people are. Insofar as we know that some of them are deeply, deeply dangerous people. The only one thing that every single person that comes to this country illegally has got in common is that they have shown that they are prepared to pay dangerous, organised criminals to break this country's laws, to smuggle themselves in here illegally. Each and every one of them is a criminal. I understand the sentiment, but the last thing I would be doing is handing any of them access to a firearm.
Yeah, they know traffickers. They must know, therefore, indirectly, whether they're aware of it or not, terrorist organisations, and they're prepared to lie and break the law. So, yeah, I mean, I like it as a sentiment, Lyndon. If only these people were sort of genuine refugees wanting a better life in Britain, that might work. I'm afraid I don't trust a lot of them. Right, let's have a little voice note now. Jackie in Manchester.
Why is Keir Starmer going to Paris to sort out Ukraine when his own country's in such a mess? We have no money, we have no military, and we can't sort out our own security with our borders. When are politicians going to stop living in the days of empire, thinking we're this major player on the world stage, and realise we're not anymore? We do not have the resources to interfere in this. And at the same time, Starmer's bending over backwards for China and giving them concession after concession. I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, very good point. Well made, Jackie. And the problem is here, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer, like a lot of our political leaders, he just feels more comfortable when he's with other political leaders at Davos and whining and dining and having high-level talks, because it means it's an escapism from, you know, the burning train wreck that is our own country and his domestic policy. And that's the same with a lot of European leaders. You look at what's happening to them at the ballot box across most of Europe. And this is the great worry, isn't it? Their domestic policy is the thing that's aiding and abetting the bad countries of this world. And Sam, Jackie makes, I think, a very important comment there about China. Whereas we talked about, you know, it's funny, we were talking earlier about Putin now being a pariah in Europe, but actually before that, they were sort of dealing with him and trading with him, and it emboldened him, it enabled him to do what he did in Ukraine. Well, surely that is exactly what the Labour Party are doing with China at the time when America has sort of woken up and gone, we cannot allow Beijing to ride roughshod over us. The Labour Party are taking completely the opposite policy. Get into our critical infrastructure. We'll pay you a load of money for solar panels, which they're going to put all over our farmland so we're not self-sufficient. I mean, it's dangerous.
Yeah, and Keir Starmer and David Lammy spoke a big game in opposition. And then what do they do the moment they're in power? kowtow. They have prostrated us as a nation before these Chinese dictators who are no friends of ours, who are deeply evil people. They've got 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. Remember and never ever forget that COVID started at one of their labs, in my view, and they certainly lied about it, letting it spread all around the world, causing all of that havoc. And what do we do instead? We allow them to build their new mega embassy, aka a great big spying hub in the Royal Mint, one of this country's most historic buildings. They've allowed them to build wind turbines everywhere that security sources have tried to reject on the basis that it was a massive national security risk. They've refused to call out what's going on in certain provinces as genocide. They refuse to stand up for what's going on in Hong Kong. This is a government that is never happier. They're not just going on the international jet-setting scene, but going on to the international jet-setting scene and then selling this country out.
Yeah, I mean, look at America saying about China. They're the ones who are getting all the fentanyl into Mexico, Canada, making that country go around like zombies with shopping carts. I mean, the rap sheet of all the things that China have done on the international stage and do in their own country is appalling. No, this government wouldn't work with any other country if it had done those things, and yet we are letting them in deeper and deeper. We're impoverishing ourselves and sending money over that. I mean, it's just... oh, you couldn't make it up, quite frankly. Right, let's have a quick chat now to Graham, who's in Leicester. Hi, Graham.
Hi, Alex. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah, it's NHS. We've had experiences over the last few weeks, and they've started bringing in the AI, as you know, but I don't really see that that's going to reign long. When you're dealing with people who've got individual problems and it's health issues as well. You know, you need, it's individualised care, so therefore you need someone with knowledge who can think outside the box. But I had dealings with it a few weeks ago, and it just ran me round in circles.
Yeah. No, I mean, the spider's web of madness sometimes, just trying to get to the right place in the NHS, let alone get an appointment, just makes a mockery of the entire system. It needs to be seriously doged. That would be the best approach to take, I fancy.
Yeah, it's like an analogy. I don't know if you've ever seen The Money Pit with Tom Hanks years ago. The NHS reminds me, it has done for a number of years, reminds me of that. You know, if you don't know what your population count is, and we don't because of immigration, then you can't put a pot of money aside. No matter how much you keep putting in it, it's never going to get to the bottom of it.
No, I totally agree. Good money after bad. Graham in Leicester, thank you ever so much. Right now, before we go to break, it's time for you to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning 25,000 quid.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, there you go. If you're entering that competition, very good luck. Now, we've just had a little bit of latest news from Downing Street saying that Sir Keir Starmer is now set to meet the US President Donald Trump next week. There were rumours that it was going to be this week. I thought that little article he wrote as an exclusive in the Telegraph was a bit of leg for America. Well, he's been told that it's now going to be next week instead. Maybe that was always the plan, or perhaps Trump is just a bit too busy. There you go. The bridge between America and Europe in the form of Sir Keir Starmer is about to get walked over next week. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, what about this heat pump thing? We were all supposed to be getting out heat pumps. We were supposed to be tearing out our boilers. Apparently the only person in the Labour cabinet with a heat pump is Ed Miliband. What even are they? We're going to be discussing that after this.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
The green revolution, they said, is gonna create a load of green jobs, they said. It will keep the tyrants off our back. People like Putin won't be able to win the energy wars, they said. And it'll be a lot cheaper for us, they said. Well, they were wrong, weren't they? They were lying. They were the ones emitting carbon into the atmosphere by gaslighting us. More gas in their gaslighting than the UK energy grid at this stage, and it still makes up about 90% on most days of the week when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow. But heat pumps, there we go. They're supposed to be the solution to the lot of it. There was going to be a deadline of how many heat pumps had to be installed and boilers ripped out. But can we afford it? I don't think we can. Well, apparently the makers of heat pumps, the boss of a company selling the technology of heat pumps, has said they're never going to be cheaper than gas boilers. So despite having right now the highest energy prices in the world, because we won't drill for gas and oil and sell it ourselves, we're now wanting people to install a technology that is never going to be affordable. We're here to explain more is Rupert Darwell, the author of Green Tyranny. Hi, Rupert. How are you doing?
Great to be joining you, Alex.
Great to have you on. You know, I've never really understood what a heat pump blimmin' is. I've never come across one. I've never seen one. I've never touched one, smelt one, seen if it works, whether it heats the home. Someone messaged me the other week saying, actually, if the temperature drops below a certain point, that thing's worthless anyway. And now we're going to learn that they're basically unaffordable. Tell us more.
Yeah, the physics of heat pumps are actually quite elegant in a way because it works on the physics of a differential temperature between outside and inside, and the pump is actually pumping that differential, if you like, from the cold to the warm, and that's how it releases heat that way. The problem with it, Alex, is it runs on electricity, and electricity is a lot more expensive than gas. To give you an idea, to pump gas, pumping methane molecules is about 1/10 of the cost of pumping energy as electrons through the grid. The grid is really, really expensive, and to bulk up the grid for net zero is going to cost billions and billions of pounds, and of course we're on the hook for that. So that's why this will never work in terms of lowering people's energy bills.
Where does the electricity itself come from? You know, before it even gets to the grid, being pumped around as electrons rather than methane gas, because surely a lot of the electricity itself comes from fossil fuels still.
Well, that's all. You're absolutely right there. When you said in the intro about the sun not shining and the wind not blowing, that is the fundamental problem with intermittent weather-dependent renewables. It doesn't produce the energy the electricity when you want it. It depends on the weather. So when the weather's not right, of course you have to have backup, and that backup comes in the form of fossil fuels. And if you remember, Alex, the last Conservative government boasted about powering past coal, and how you can see pictures of Alok Sharma blowing up a coal-fired power station. So now we don't have enough power stations to generate the electricity. When there's not enough wind, we depend on interconnectors from continental Europe. But when they don't have enough wind, we're really stuck.
And I mean, the other mad thing is, even if we went hell for leather towards the net zero targets, which I think is sort of everything's having to be watered down because it's just not doable, ain't going to make a blind bit of difference if Donald Trump is there drilling like a madman over in America.
And we've got, on the other side of the world, we've got China, which is a massive coal-based economy, building coal-fired power stations like no one else. Our emissions are less than 1% of global emissions. It really doesn't matter what we do, except to us. What it will do is impoverish ourselves and basically break our economy.
Now, I hate to put you on the spot, although it is my job as an interviewer, but I was having conversations with people at the weekend, and there are a number of people who said to me, what's so interesting now is even people like you in the media will talk about carbon emissions and what we need to do as if it's a 100% settled science. Are we sort of singing off that hymn sheet? Are we able to say that actually everyone needs to go back to the drawing board, full stop on this topic?
I think that the key thing is climate change. The question it's framed is climate change happening? If it is, we need to go to net zero. The real question is man-made climate change likely to be catastrophic? If it's not catastrophic, if it's not a huge problem, why are we going about completely restructuring our economy and making everyone poorer? And the evidence to date is actually climate change is not catastrophic. You remember they talk about tipping points, irreversible tipping points, and all that kind of stuff. One of the first ones is the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. And when you look at when this might happen, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's multiple millennia, Alex. We're not talking about decades or even centuries. We're talking about multiple millennia. This is really off the scale stuff. It's not going to happen on a human time scale. So we're absolutely fixated on obsessing about something that is catastrophic climate change, which is not a problem. It's not happening.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, actually, because when you've got some of the people who've made the big documentaries all about the world's on fire and, you know, by this point, this is going to have happened, we've actually passed some of those so-called tipping points already. And guess what? Nothing seems to have really happened. And what about solar panels? Because we know this government, hell-bent on sticking them everywhere. And parts of Wiltshire, where my other half lives, they want to cover acres and acres and acres and acres of land with solar panels and actually stop farmers being able to use that land to farm, which I think is absolutely crazy. I mean, are solar panels viable in this country where most days of the week we seem to be caked in cloud? And also, even if they are, can you not stick them on top of buildings? Why do they have to cover loads of fields?
Yeah, I mean, sticking them on top of buildings, I mean, the building is more expensive to put them up there, and also the roof might not be pointing in the right direction. But fundamentally, you're right. There is a problem with environmentalism, which is they're destroying nature to save nature. This is about industrializing the countryside and turning it into essentially an industrial desert of panels. We live far too far north. We have far too much cloud to make solar remotely viable. They kind of work in where you need air conditioning. There might be a case for it. It's very rare in this country you need air conditioning.
That's true, and if only we did. What do you think about all of this, Sam? Heat pumps, solar panels, and this government seems to be hell-bent on still following what essentially was a precedent set by Boris Johnson, especially, who seems to adore net zero targets. Ed Miliband has taken over most of the grid now. We've had to pay for it, and is apparently the sort of sole shareholder in it, which chills me to the bone. Are they going to have to wake up, smell the coffee, and realise that these targets are going to have to be dropped? Or do you think they're going to carry on driving us into oblivion?
Well, I think the world is going to gradually come to the realisation that, look, when you've got your biggest economies simply not on board with it, then actually money would be much better spent on adaptation, building new sea walls, for example, than it would be on massive changes to the entire energy mix. But we should never, ever, ever forget the very, very real victims of this policy, which are those people who were working in industrial jobs, who have now seen those jobs move overseas to countries where they actually pollute even more, but that are simply not viable in the UK, and in large part because industrial energy prices in this country are 4 times what they are in the United States, for example. It's no wonder we can't make anything in this country. No wonder we've not got any steel industry when those kind of price differences are between us and all of the countries we're trying to compete against.
Very good point. Well made. Thank you to Sam. Thank you, of course, to Rupert Darwell as well, author of Green Tyranny. We're going to take a short break now, but if you thought...
Okay, cheers, bye.
Oh, bye, Rupert. There you got a little bit of extra Rupert there, didn't we? Got an extra sort of 2 seconds of a niceness and etiquette. It's always welcome. Now, after the break, if the NHS wasn't in enough of a mess already, it's going to double, or not double, the race for quotas to win diversity wars is still doing all that stuff. It wants to get the Stonewall certificate and is going to double down on how many people from various different nationalities and various skin colours and various sexualities can have jobs, as if the NHS needs to do anything else to make its situation more untenable. And it's the universities that's going to double investment in diversity stuff over the next 3 years. Just when you thought DEI was about to DIE, it ain't. We're back after this.
dangerous thing is when we have people like Ashley, second in charge to the NHS and other health services, we get things like, you know, asking men if they're pregnant before they get x-rayed. It's just those are the real life consequences of putting someone in power who's got this weird, messed up, woke, loony mindset. And it is, you know, it's not funny, Simon.
Yeah, but so,
you might be laughing because you're a male.
She says trans women are women. They're not.
We need to recognise that this is a very serious moment for the security of Europe. The United States is looking like it's stepping back from NATO in its commitment to help support peace in Europe, and that is very serious indeed. I think it represents extraordinary naivety on the part of President Trump, and the rest of his team. And I'd like to remind your readers that I think it's your view.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, before we go on to our next topic, let's have a listen to Craig, who wants to tell us what he thinks about the topic we were discussing before the break, heat pumps.
Alex, good afternoon. This is Craig in Ilkley. Regarding the heat pump discussion, you know, they might make sense if we had electricity provided by nuclear power stations in the same way that they have in Ukraine. Because the last time I checked the domestic tariff for Ukraine ahead of the war, it was 5 pence per kilowatt hour, 24 hours a day. So if we had that here, and you were paying 5 pence per kilowatt hour, which would be cheaper than gas, then a heat pump might make sense. But the problem is, we don't. We pay 25 pence per kilowatt hour. So the numbers don't stack up. It doesn't make any economic sense to install one.
Yeah,
okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Oh, I like the end of that. It was so polite in the second half of the show. Thing is about nuclear, it's been so demonised, hasn't it? And when you look at the number of countries that actually use nuclear, that depend on nuclear, Japan especially is a very interesting example of this, because when there was that tsunami in Japan and the nuclear reactor sort of got flooded, they managed to deal with it. It was a sort of random act of God event. And Japan are the ones actually saying to Britain, you have the technology for small modular reactors, these pop-up nuclear power stations that Rolls-Royce are able to develop, that we actually use on our submarines to power them, which is why Australia didn't buy French submarines, which are diesel-powered because they're rubbish, and actually came to use ours instead, because we're brilliant at this technology. And Japan wants to buy it and are saying, but why is your government not buying it? Why is your government not doing it? We shouldn't be scared of nuclear, should we? It really is the solution to the energy crisis.
Yeah, it is possible to have clean, green, if that's what you want, and unlimited energy. But what we saw is a bunch of environmental movements getting hung up on the actual solution to the problem that they were talking about. And when they did the digging, when they looked into who was pushing these claims about nuclear, so many of them had ties back to Russia that was pushing this propaganda. Why? Because Russia wanted to get the UK and indeed all of Europe either hooked on selling the gas that it was exporting, and or to deindustrialise their own economies, such that they would be comparatively weaker against them. And we have allowed this delusion to set in, and then coupled with our planning system, coupled with our mad bureaucracy, we make it basically impossible to build anything. People have been talking about building power stations up in Suffolk, up in Hinkley Point down in Somerset for years. Nothing gets built. It costs 10 times as much as it ought to, and then we wonder why we haven't got an economy that makes anything anymore.
No, exactly. And do you know who'd love that SMR technology? China. They are begging. When they did a deal with France about 2 years ago, little old pathetic Macron, they were like, please tell us how to make SMRs. They don't know how to do it. They would love to know. Right, now, let's talk about our final topic of the day with a brilliant man, James Esses, founder of Just Therapy. James, diversity, DEI, it hasn't gone anywhere, has it? I mean, thankfully, Donald Trump has said that's the end. We're not doing this rubbish anymore. It is racist. racism. It is sexism. And we're just going to rinse it out of our systems. But, well, we're kind of doing the opposite. We've actually got more diversity officers per head than America does. 10,000 currently at large, ruining our country and making public services and schools and the civil service miserable. And yet, here we go. NHS hospitals have signed up to anti-racism award scheme that asks them to meet race quotas. 30 trusts have joined the programme, which require boards to have a minimum number of directors from Black, Asian or minority ethnic backgrounds if they're going to achieve gold status. And there, at the same time, universities are doubling investment in diversity stuff. Oxford University spent $2.5 million developing EDI teams. The cost of equality, diversion and inclusion salaries at British universities have doubled in 3 years, cost the sector £28 million a year. The top paid diversity bosses are paid a salary of up to £119,000. This is just ridiculous. They're not needed. They do more damage than good, and they're essentially leeching the funds out of vital institutions.
Well, thank you for thoroughly depressing me there, Alex. I mean, they say that when America sneezes, the UK catches a cold, and I'm desperately waiting for this virus to hit our shores, because whilst Donald Trump is axing all of this madness, we seem to be doubling down on it. You know, I come from a psychotherapeutic background. There's something called projection, which is where you project elements of yourself onto other people. And that's what's happening in the NHS. These people who term themselves anti-racists, they are the biggest racists going. Why? Because they are judging people according to the colour of their skin rather than on their talents and their merits alone. And for every Black senior leader who's going to be shoehorned in now under these quota system, that is potentially robbing a more better able candidate simply based on their skin colour. I mean, it's really quite outrageous. And Wes Streeting has come out and he said, you know, we don't want these DEI ticks box exercises, but he seems to be trying to back both horses, because he also said that the lack of Black representation at senior levels in the NHS was glaring. Well, why exactly should it be glaring? He is attempting to infer from this that there is some sort of underhanded motive going on, some ulterior motive as to why Black individuals are not in senior roles. And there's simply no evidence for this whatsoever. We need to be judging people based on their merits, particularly in our public sector, not on their skin colour.
I'm interested to actually talk to you about this from a psychotherapeutic point of view, because I read a brilliant report. I think it might have been Rutgers University in America, but I can't remember precisely what now. But they had essentially done a controlled experiment where they had got people to do critical race theory courses or not. And then they put these people, they set these people a range of scenarios. And what they found was the people who had been ingesting critical race theory in this under sort of, controlled experiment conditions actually were the ones who exhibited more fascistic tendencies, nasty tendencies, who wanted to persecute, who wanted to ostracize, who saw punishment and wanted to avenge with every single situation, where the people who hadn't been exposed to critical race theory were just a lot more circumspect and, as a result, therefore, more, for want of a better word, inclusive. I mean, do you think as well that a lot of this so-called diversity training actually makes people into little racists?
I think there's an element of that. At the end of the day, if you shove this stuff down people's throats, they're going to become more and more fed up, and I think potentially more and more intolerant, so it's counterproductive. But I think that society is currently going through some sort of state of collective madness, and we can see this by virtue of other mental health conditions and cognitive distortions, things like black and white thinking, catastrophizing, assuming the worst case scenario, even victimhood and fragility. These are all notions that are pushed as part of this DEI training, and I think we're making people collectively unwell. I mean, I sat in on a British Psychological Society webinar recently. They supply psychologists to the NHS. And one of their senior leaders there said that if people want to be anti-racist, if white colleagues want to be anti-racist, they may have to give up their jobs and salaries to Black colleagues in order to fulfill that ambition. I mean, this is out and out racism.
That's essentially, as far as I can tell, persecuting white people for having committed absolutely no crime. But also, you're talking about sort of people being mentally, being made to feel more mentally ill, whether it's sort of panic, existential worry, identity politics, making people more self-indulgent perhaps when it comes to just having a hard time. But when you have the medical profession, if you're the sort of, a trust that's adopted some of these more ridiculous woke policies, and when a man goes for an x-ray, they're asked, might you be pregnant? Is this not instilling into the heart of where pragmatism is needed, which is science in medicine, sort of pseudo quackery? And surely that's going to be harmful when it comes to delivering healthcare if facts no longer matter.
Oh, precisely. They're putting virtue signalling and trying to protect people's feelings above reality and the truth. And one area in which that should never happen is when it comes to medicine. Even just this month, we're currently in the middle of LGBT History Month, don't you know? And I've seen a number of NHS trusts flying the pride flag as if it carries the same status as our national flag. And they would say, and this is the irony of it, because DEI is the exact opposite of what it claims to be, because in the sense of trying to be inclusive, they are excluding people, because most people, most of the great British public who see that flag will say to themselves, if I believe in biological reality, if I believe that men cannot become women, if I believe that children should not be sterilised and mutilated, I'm not welcome here. So they're the very opposite of the things that they claim to be.
No, I couldn't agree more. James, thank you ever so much. It's fantastic to have you on the show. James Esses, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, Sam, this is the thing. When it comes to a lot of this stuff, it actually is the poison that is causing harm. It's dividing society. It's not just about economy, and a bit like the foreign aid stuff where we laugh about the wokery and actually this is a waste of money. But at its heart, it is spiteful, it is nasty, it is siloing people into little tribes which then fight each other and don't trust each other. Is it not enough to just say to the gay community, get on, live with who you like, have whatever relationship you like, and that's it? Why do we need the flags and the bunting and the lanyards and the history months?
Yeah, and remember, every penny spent on stuff like this is money that is not going into what the NHS is meant to be doing, which is treating patients. And look, who on earth does the NHS think it's serving, right? It's got an elderly patient base, and I have never, ever, 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 ever heard of anyone going into hospital and them saying, oh no, it wasn't diverse enough.
Right.
It wasn't diverse enough. Nobody says that. People say, doctors didn't speak English. People say, couldn't understand what was being said to me. People say, I wasn't getting treated fast enough. If there's any institution on earth that is not crying out for more diversity being foisted upon it, it is the National Health Service.
Yeah, well, there you go, David Bull. Who better to ask as we hand over the reins of this great show to you? I mean, it's true, isn't it? This whole idea that, the NHS is competing to win special anti-racism awards for having diversity quotas. And actually, this is because they know if you did this on the ward floors, the diversity is off the charts. They're now having to say it's got to be the directors that have to be
the
diverse.
whole thing is absolutely shambolic. It's chaotic and it's wrong, the whole thing. And actually the money needs to go into frontline care. I don't care who you sleep with, quite frankly. I want the best doctors, the best nurses. I want the best clinical care. The idea that if you're a gay person, you feel much happier going to a hospital because there's a rainbow crossing in front of you is nonsensical. So all of this has to stop, and it really has to stop now. I just think it's all got totally out of control. And particularly when you're bringing in diversity and equality managers paid more than some of the clinicians, particularly junior doctors, that's absolutely abhorrent.
Yeah, I mean, some of the salaries, £119,000.
I might apply.
Yeah, exactly. I'm your gay doctor. Exactly. There you go. They'd roll over. They wouldn't roll out the red carpet because you're also a Brexiteer, so you've been
that's also
permanently
true. But look, at the end of the
excommunicated.
day, it's about meritocracy, making sure we have the best people in the NHS and providing exemplary care, which